There is a specific kind of quiet that settles over you when something familiar is playing in the background. Not silence, not noise, but something in between. A soft, steady hum of a world you already know, voices you recognize, a rhythm your brain has heard so many times that it stops working to follow along and starts simply resting inside it. That is what we are doing tonight. We are going back to Springfield. All the way back in some cases. Back to the very first season, which aired when most people had never heard the name Bart Simpson, when the show was brand new and strange in ways nobody had mapped yet, when the writers were still figuring out what this town was supposed to be and accidentally made it something far more interesting than anything they had planned. We are going to move through every season, one at a time, slowly, not rushing toward anything, not building to a dramatic conclusion, just drifting through the strangest, most dreamlike, most quietly unsettling episodes the show ever produced, in the order the show produced them, season by season, from the very beginning to the most recent years. Some of these episodes are famous. Some of them have been largely forgotten. Some of them were hated when they first aired and have become, over time, something that fans return to with a kind of complicated fondness, the way you might feel about a weird old house you used to live in. You remember it clearly. You remember exactly what made it strange. And somehow that strangeness is precisely why you kept thinking about it for years afterward. We are going to let that strangeness wash over us tonight, gently. No urgency, no rush. Just the long, wandering story of the most analyzed animated show in television history, told sideways, through its most peculiar corners. So settle in, get comfortable, close your eyes if you want, or let them go soft and unfocused. Either way, Springfield is waiting. It always is. Let us start at the beginning. Season 1 of The Simpsons is a strange artifact in retrospect. It has 9 episodes, a short order by later standards, and it exists in a kind of visual and emotional register that the show would move away from fairly quickly. The animation is rougher. The faces are slightly off, eyes positioned a little differently, bodies a little less settled into their final proportions. Homer sounds slightly different. The whole thing has the quality of a sketch that is in the process of becoming a painting, where you can still see the underlying marks. The strangest episode of Season 1 is not the one most people would guess. It is not the Christmas special, which aired first and which sent a family to a dog track and came home with a greyhound that would become a fixture of the household for decades. It is not the episode where Homer joins a bowling team and gets a little too invested in his own athletic mediocrity. The strangest episode of Season 1 is the 8th episode, which aired on January 21st, 1990. It is called The Telltale Head. The title is a reference to Edgar Allan Poe, which is itself a signal. The Simpsons was not a show that typically announced its literary ambitions in the episode title. Most episodes were named plainly. This one reached backward into gothic horror and borrowed the rhythm of one of the most famous guilt stories ever written, and then it wrapped that borrowed darkness around the story of a 10-year-old boy who sawed the head off a statue. Here is what happens in the episode. Bart wants to be accepted by a group of older kids, a small cluster of teenage delinquents who represent, in Bart's imagination, the cool and careless outer edge of Springfield's social world. Their ringleader is a boy named Jimbo Jones, who will go on to become a recurring background figure in the show, but who in this episode feels genuinely dangerous in the way that older, bigger kids feel dangerous when you are 10 and trying to impress them. The group mocks a statue of Jebediah Springfield, the town's founding father. The statue stands in the center of Springfield's main square, a bronze figure on a pedestal, the kind of civic monument that is supposed to represent the soul of a community. Jimbo says that decapitating the statue would be the funniest thing anyone has ever done. Bart, desperate to belong, takes a hacksaw to the statue in the middle of the night and removes its head. He brings the head home. And this is where the episode becomes something strange and genuinely affecting, because the moment Bart arrives home with the bronze head under his arm, the rest of Springfield goes into a collective mourning that Bart did not anticipate and is not equipped to process. The whole town grieves the statue as if something real has been lost. People stand around the headless pedestal and weep. Reverend Lovejoy delivers sermons about the desecration. Homer, who is being set up in this episode as a man with a genuine reverence for Springfield's founding mythology, is visibly devastated. The Jebediah Springfield legend is discussed with the kind of weight usually reserved for something sacred. And Bart is carrying the head in a paper bag, unable to confess, the guilt growing with every passing hour. exactly like the heartbeat under the floorboards in the Poe story the title invokes. What makes this episode strange is the texture of Bart's isolation. He is surrounded by his family, present in every scene, and yet completely alone with what he has done. There is a quality to his solitude in this episode that feels more emotionally precise than most of what the early show attempted. You understand watching it that Bart has not just damaged a statue. He has accidentally discovered that belonging to something is more complicated than impressing the people who seem to inhabit it casually. Jimbo and his friends do not actually care about the statue. They suggested destroying it as performance, as proof of their own detachment from the community's values. But the community's values turned out to be real, and Bart is now holding the physical evidence of their violation, and nobody told him this was going to hurt. The resolution is quiet by the standards of what the show would later become. Bart confesses. He returns the head. The townspeople are initially angry, but the anger softens into something more complicated when Bart explains what happened, how he was trying to fit in, how he misread the situation, how he did not understand what he was doing until he had already done it. Jebediah Springfield's own legend, which gets elaborated in this episode, is about exactly that kind of mistake and what you do afterward. There is a small detail in this episode that most people miss on first viewing because the episode does not pause to underline it. When Bart saws the head off the statue, the scene is shot from a distance, in near darkness, with the sound of the hacksaw doing most of the emotional work. There is no dramatic lighting. There is no score telling you how to feel. It is just a small boy doing something irreversible in the quiet of a sleeping town. That choice, to show the act without theatrical embellishment, gives the scene a weight that the show would sometimes struggle to replicate in later seasons when it had more budget and more confidence. The simplicity is the point. Bad decisions look ordinary when you are in the middle of making them. It is only afterward, in the full light of the consequences, that they take on their proper shape. Season 1 is also where the show established a tone that it would return to in its strangest moments throughout the decades that followed. It is a tone that sits just slightly to one side of normal domestic comedy, where the jokes are real and the laughter is genuine, but underneath there is something being worked out, something about family and loneliness and the gap between who you want to be seen as and who you actually are. The episode called Moaning Lisa is another one from this first season that deserves a slow, quiet look. It is the 6th episode, which aired on February 11th, 1990. It is about Lisa Simpson being sad, which sounds simple enough, but the show takes that simplicity and holds it very still. Lisa is depressed. The episode does not diagnose her, does not use that word, does not construct an elaborate narrative reason for her emotional state. She is simply sad in the way that certain people are sometimes simply sad, a baseline melancholy that arrives without a specific cause and will not be argued away with logic or distraction. She wanders around Springfield at night listening to the sound of the city. She meets a street musician named Bleeding Gums Murphy, a jazz saxophonist of enormous talent and uncertain circumstances, and he becomes, in this episode and in the few appearances he makes across the show's run, the figure who most fully sees Lisa for what she is. What Bleeding Gums understands about Lisa, and what the episode shows us, is that her sadness is not a problem to be solved. It is part of the instrument she plays. The saxophone through which she processes the world has a range that includes grief, and denying that range would be denying the music. He does not try to cheer her up. He plays alongside her in the night air of Springfield, and the music they make together is not cheerful. It is honest. Marge's response to Lisa's sadness is what gives the episode its most complicated moment. Marge, who loves Lisa ferociously and wants above all else for her daughter to be okay, initially tells Lisa to smile, to project cheerfulness, to perform contentment she does not feel because the world responds better to smiling girls than to honest ones. It is advice that Marge gives out of genuine love and genuine practicality, and it is also advice that would damage Lisa if she followed it, advice that would teach her to hide what she is. Marge reverses course by the end of the episode. She tells Lisa to feel whatever she feels, to not apologize for the depth of it, to trust that the people who love her can handle her sadness without needing it packaged into something more manageable. It is a small retraction of bad advice and a return to something true, and the show delivers it without ceremony, which is exactly right. There is a moment late in the episode where Lisa plays her saxophone alone on a street corner, and the camera simply watches her from a distance. No close-up, no dramatic lighting, just a small girl with an instrument at night, making something beautiful out of something painful, and nobody around to see it except us. That image is season 1 of The Simpsons distilled to a single frame. A world that is funny, yes, and warm, yes, but underneath it always quietly somebody carrying something heavy through the dark. The lamplight on the sidewalk, the sound of the saxophone drifting across an empty street in a town that is sleeping and dreaming and not quite aware of itself. The thing about season 1 that people tend to overlook is how much groundwork it was laying for strangeness that would not be fully visible for years. The town of Springfield in these first 9 episodes is still assembling itself. Characters appear without their final characteristics. Barney Gumble is briefly smart. Principal Skinner seems genuinely threatening, rather than pathetic. The town has a quality of not quite knowing what it is yet, of being in the early stages of becoming the place it will spend the next 35 years being. There is something almost cosmological about this, if you let yourself think about it late at night when your thoughts are loose and willing to go anywhere. Springfield spent its first season establishing the rules that the rest of the show would spend decades bending and occasionally breaking entirely. The family dynamics, the geography of the town, the hierarchy of who matters and who is background decoration. All of it was set in motion in 9 episodes, like a complicated clock being wound for the first time, and nobody watching at the time could have guessed how long it would keep ticking. The 2-part episode that ended season 1, Some Enchanted Evening, is technically a season finale but has the quality of a dream. Marge calls a radiotherapist in despair about her marriage. Homer, told that he is a terrible husband, spends the episode trying and failing to be romantic. Bart and Lisa are left with a babysitter who turns out to be a wanted criminal. The plot is absurd by any realistic standard, and yet the emotional core, Marge's loneliness, Homer's cluelessness, the particular way that the people who love each other most completely can still fail to see each other clearly, that core is real, and it does not go away just because the babysitter is on America's Most Wanted. This is the trick the show learned in its first season and would keep performing for decades. You can dress the emotional truth in any costume you want. You can put it in a story about a babysitter with a criminal history or a boy who steals a statue's head or a girl playing jazz alone at midnight. The truth will still be there underneath, doing its work, finding its way to whoever is watching and needs it. That is what we are here for tonight. Not the costumes, the truth underneath. And the truth is, Springfield is a strange, warm, melancholy, endlessly dreaming place. And tonight we are going to live inside it, season by season, until the dreaming becomes our own. Before we drift into season 2, pause here for just a moment. Let the image of Springfield at night settle over you like something soft. The lamplight on the streets, the nuclear plant glowing on the hill, the houses with their yellow-lit windows. Somewhere inside one of those houses, Bart is awake when he should be sleeping, thinking about something he did that he cannot take back. Somewhere else, Lisa is sitting by her window with her saxophone across her knees, not playing, just holding it, listening to the town breathe. If you are watching this late at night, or early in the morning, or somewhere in that in-between hour when time stops having a precise meaning, drop a comment below and tell me where you are in the world and what time it is where you are sitting. I want to know. There is something that happens when people across different places are all drifting through the same dreamscape at different hours, as if the dream itself has no single location, as if Springfield really is everywhere, as if the floating timeline is not just a storytelling device but something closer to a weather system that moves through all of us at once. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is a good time. We have a long way to go through Springfield tonight, and you will want to find your way back. Season 2 of The Simpsons arrived in the fall of 1990, and by then the show knew something it had only suspected during the first season. It knew that the strangest choices were frequently the most durable ones. The episodes that broke slightly from the expected shape of a family sitcom, the ones that leaned into discomfort or dreaminess or the particular kind of sadness that does not resolve cleanly, those were the episodes people could not stop thinking about. Season 2 has 22 episodes, more than double the first season's run. In among the standard plots, the Homer loses his job stories and the Bart gets in trouble at school stories, there are several that do something fundamentally different, that reach into a stranger space and stay there for 22 minutes without apologizing. The strangest episode of Season 2 is arguably Bart Gets Hit by a Car. It aired on January 10, 1991. The title is not misleading. Bart runs into the street and is hit by Mr. Burns' limousine. What follows is not a hospital drama. What follows is a journey. Bart goes to both heaven and hell in the opening minutes of the episode, a rapid tour of the afterlife conducted at the pace of a dream sequence, which is appropriate because the whole thing takes on a dreamy, slightly off-kilter quality from the moment the wheels make contact with Bart's small body. Hell, in this version, is presided over by a version of the devil who is bored and administrative, filling out paperwork. Heaven is a pale, formless expanse where Bart is welcomed by an angel who informs him, with gentle regret, that it is not his time yet. This is before the episode has even properly started. Bart is returned to his body and wakes up in the hospital, and from that point forward, the episode becomes something quite different from a meditation on mortality. It becomes a story about lying and money and the way that injury in America quickly becomes a financial proposition. Mr. Burns's lawyer, a character introduced here, is a slick and ruthless operator who will say anything in service of his client. Lionel Hutz, the Simpson family's disaster of an attorney, is equally dishonest but much less competent about it. The legal proceedings that fill the back half of the episode are played for comedy, and they are funny, but what they are really about is the transformation of a real event, a child's real pain, into a negotiation. The moment Bart was hit by that car, his body became evidence in a dispute about money. His injury is only real as long as it can be assigned a dollar value and argued over by men in suits. There is a moment where Marge, who witnessed the accident, is asked to testify, and she cannot bring herself to lie even though lying would benefit her family financially. This is played as a character beat, a confirmation of Marge's fundamental decency, but it also has a melancholy undertow. Marge's honesty costs her family a significant amount of money. Being good in the show's universe is often expensive. The people who are willing to compromise what they know to be true are the ones who walk away with the settlement check. The episode ends without anyone being exactly punished or exactly rewarded. Mr. Burns pays a small settlement, less than he should have. The Simpsons get less than they deserved. Lionel Hutz gets nothing because he is terrible at his job. The whole thing resolves into a kind of ethical stalemate that the show does not editorialize about, just presents, with a flat honesty that feels more accurate than any tidy moral would. But the strange part, the part that sits with you, is the opening. Bart in hell, Bart in heaven, Bart coming back. The afterlife handled as a brief administrative inconvenience before the real business of the episode begins. The show drops you into genuine cosmic territory, lets you float there for a few minutes, and then pulls you back to a Springfield courtroom, as if the transition requires no adjustment at all. That tonal whiplash is something The Simpsons would refine over the decades. The ability to move between genuine strangeness and mundane domestic comedy without signaling the shift, without asking the audience to consciously follow the change and register. You are watching a cartoon family deal with a lawsuit, and also you have just been to hell and back, and the show would like you to hold both of those things at the same time without finding the combination absurd. The episode called Bart's Dog Gets an F is from Season 2 as well, airing on March 7th, 1991. And it is strange in a quieter way, a way that is easy to miss if you are not paying close attention. The plot is simple enough on its surface. Santa's little helper, the family greyhound adopted at the end of the Christmas episode, has become unmanageable. He destroys furniture. He eats things he should not eat. He is, by any objective measure, a terrible dog, and the family sends him to an obedience school run by a stern instructor named Emily Winthrop. The deadline is clear. Either the dog passes the obedience course or the family gives him up. What makes this episode strange is how seriously it takes the question of whether Santa's little helper will pass. There are episode plots in animated comedies that carry genuine stakes, where you actually do not know how the story is going to resolve, and then there are episode plots where the outcome is a formality dressed in dramatic clothing. This episode manages to sit in an uncomfortable space between those two categories. The family's attachment to the dog is real, and the threat is real, and the obedience school itself is treated with an odd dignity that prevents you from being entirely certain the dog will be okay. Emily Winthrop is a character who could have been played purely for laughs, a comic opera disciplinarian, but the episode gives her just enough texture to make her something else. She loves dogs. She is not warm exactly, not soft, but she loves them, and her toughness is in service of that love rather than a substitute for it. When she sees that Santa's little helper is genuinely trying, even failing spectacularly in his attempts, she responds to the effort rather than the results. The moment where Santa's little helper finally succeeds at the course is surprisingly affecting for a Season 2 episode of a cartoon. The family is there watching, and their relief is not played as comedy. It is just relief. The kind you feel when something you were afraid of losing turns out to still be there. But here is the strange thing that the episode plants and never quite addresses directly. Emily Winthrop, at one point in the episode, suggests that the real problem with Santa's little helper is not the dog, but the owners. She says this obliquely, professionally, in the way that people who work with animals often end up making observations about the people attached to them that are more diagnostic than anything they say about the animals themselves. She is right, and the episode knows she is right, and The Simpsons' own chaos, Homer's impulsiveness, Bart's inconsistency, the general entropy of a household where nobody quite agrees on anything, has produced a dog that reflects all of it back at them. Santa's little helper is not a bad dog. He is a dog shaped by a chaotic environment into a creature of pure reactive impulse, doing exactly what the environment has taught him that behavior looks like. The episode does not follow this thread to its conclusion. It is a Season 2 episode of a show that was still primarily interested in being funny. But the thread is there, visible if you want to look at it, and it connects to something the show would explore more directly in later seasons. The idea that the Simpson household is not just eccentric but genuinely producing certain kinds of damage in everyone and everything it contains. Season 3 arrived in the fall of 1991, and by now the show was confident enough in its own strangeness to attempt episodes that had no real precedent in animated television. The strangest episode of Season 3 is not the one with the haunted house, though that episode, which is technically a Treehouse of Horror segment, has its own remarkable qualities. The strangest episode of Season 3 is the 15th episode, which aired on January 23, 1992. It is called Homer Alone. Homer has a breakdown on a highway overpass. Not a metaphorical breakdown. He stops his car in the middle of traffic, gets out, sits on the hood, and refuses to move. Police negotiators arrive. News helicopters circle overhead. The whole town watches on television as Homer Simpson sits in the middle of a bridge and simply stops. This is played partly for laughs, as everything in the show is, but the laugh is nervous. The laugh is the kind that happens when something is funny and also uncomfortable, and you are not entirely sure which feeling is supposed to win. Homer's breakdown is real. The exhaustion that produces it is real. He has been managing the household while Marge has been sick, and he has discovered in the process what Marge manages on a daily basis, which is everything, and the weight of it has simply become too much. The episode then does something genuinely unexpected. It sends Marge on vacation alone. This sounds straightforward but was, at the time, a radical thing to do with the character. Marge Simpson in the early seasons of the show is almost entirely defined by her relationship to other people. She is Homer's wife, Bart and Lisa, and Maggie's mother, the center of the household's gravity. The idea of Marge as a person with her own needs, her own desire for solitude and rest, her own interior life that exists independently of the family, had not really been the subject of an episode until this one. She goes to Rancho Relaxo, a spa resort, and she is alone there. Genuinely alone. The episode shows her sitting by a pool and reading a book, and ordering room service and sleeping in an enormous bed without anyone requiring anything from her. It shows this not as comedy and not as tragedy, but as simple pleasure, the unremarkable but clearly profound pleasure of a woman who is usually taking care of everything, being temporarily free of the obligation to take care of anything. Meanwhile, back in Springfield, the household descends into predictable chaos. Homer cannot manage Bart and Lisa alone. Patty and Selma take Maggie and are terrible at concealing how much they enjoy having her to themselves. The comedy comes from the difficulty Homer encounters when he is left without Marge's invisible infrastructure supporting him. But the camera keeps returning to Marge at Rancho Relaxo, and each time it does, she looks a little more like herself, a little more rested, a little more like a person rather than a function. The show is not making a feminist argument exactly, not the way a later episode might explicitly frame its ideas about the labor of caregiving. It is just showing you something real about a character, and trusting that the image will do the work. The strangest moment in the episode comes near the end, when Marge returns home and the household is immediately, visibly, relieved. Not just happy to see her, but relieved. As if her absence was not just inconvenient, but genuinely destabilizing. As if the household's ability to hold itself together depends on something Marge provides that nobody has ever named or thanked her for. She walks through the door and everything reorganizes around her presence. And you can see in her face, in the way Marge's face worked in the early seasons when the animation still allowed for genuine subtlety, that she sees this too. that she understands what her return means and what it costs her. And she lets the door close behind her and becomes the center of everything again, because she loves these people, and because there is no version of this life that does not include being its center, and because understanding a thing does not make you immune to it. That is the strange, quiet heart of Homer alone. Not the breakdown on the overpass, not the spa vacation, the moment of return, and everything that comes with it, seen and unsaid. Season 3 also contains one of the most underrated episodes in the show's early run. It is the third episode, the one called When Flanders Failed, which aired on October 3rd, 1991. Ned Flanders opens a store called the Leftorium, a retail shop catering exclusively to left-handed customers. Springfield does not have a large enough left-handed population to sustain such a business. The store is failing, and Homer, who witnessed Ned's wish on a chicken bone to succeed and privately wished for Ned to fail, begins to understand that his neighbor's actual failure is not what he wanted at all. The episode is about the gap between wishing someone ill and being willing to watch it happen. Homer has spent years cultivating an ambient irritation with Ned Flanders, a low-grade resentment of everything about his neighbor that is better, tidier, more successful, more cheerful, more devout. This irritation is comfortable. It requires nothing of Homer. He can feel vaguely superior to Ned by feeling vaguely resentful of Ned, and neither feeling demands any action. When the Leftorium actually starts to fail, when Ned is genuinely struggling, Homer's resentment turns into something more uncomfortable. He is confronted with the real consequence of his passive ill will, the actual human cost of a thing he wanted in a moment of petty irritation, and he does not like how it feels. Homer eventually rallies left-handed people to the Leftorium, saving Ned's business through an absurd series of interventions involving a phone directory and a great deal of walking around Springfield. The comedy of the rescue is real, but what the episode has established by the time it arrives is something more interesting than a plot. It has established that Homer's relationship with Ned is more complicated than it usually appears, that underneath the irritation is a respect Homer will never volunteer and a warmth he will only express indirectly through action rather than admission. The chicken bone wish is the episode's strangest device. A character literally makes a wish on poultry. The show treats this wish with complete seriousness, following it to its consequence without winking at the camera. It is neither magical realism nor pure comedy. It is something in between. The show's specific mode of letting the absurd carry emotional weight without undermining either the absurdity or the emotion. This is what made the early seasons of The Simpsons genuinely strange. Not the treehouse of horror episodes or the celebrity cameos or the surreal musical numbers, but these smaller moments, these chicken bone wishes and nighttime saxophone songs and statues without heads. The ordinary world of Springfield kept producing these brief flares of the uncanny, and the show kept following them without explanation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for the mundane and the strange to coexist without comment. Let that be the last thought of this section. The mundane and the strange, living side by side on the same quiet street, and nobody in Springfield thinking to remark on it. People who love The Simpsons tend to speak of the Golden Age as if it were a geological formation, something vast and solid and precisely bounded. The consensus in most fan communities places it somewhere between seasons 3 and 8, with the center of gravity around seasons 4 through 6. These were the years when the show was doing things no animated series had attempted, when the writing was dense and layered and operating on multiple registers simultaneously, when the emotional truth and the absurdist comedy were not in tension but were somehow the same thing. But even within the Golden Age there are edges, corners where the show went somewhere that did not quite fit the standard account of what those seasons were. Episodes that look, from a certain angle, less like achievements of the Golden Era and more like strange dreams the show had while it was doing something else, detours into territory it would not return to for years, sometimes decades. Season 4 has 22 episodes and is by many accounts the peak of the peak. It contains the episode where Homer goes to space, the episode where Bart sells his soul, and the episode that introduced the coma theory, the clip show where the vending machine falls on Homer and the show tells you something has changed without quite advertising the change. But the strangest episode of Season 4 is none of those. The strangest episode of Season 4 is the second episode, the one that aired on September 24, 1992. It is called A Streetcar Named Marge. Marge joins a community theater production of a musical adaptation of A Streetcar Named Desire. she is cast as Blanche Dubois. Homer, who does not support her involvement in the production and who does not understand why she would want to do something that takes her out of the house 3 nights a week, becomes the template for Stanley, the monstrous husband, in the director's imagination. This is funny. It is also deeply uncomfortable in ways the episode earns rather than stumbles into. The musical numbers from the fictional show within the show are, genuinely, quite good. The songs have a quality that suggests the writers took the parody seriously enough to make it work as music, rather than just as comedy about music. But what the songs are about is what makes them strange. They are about need. About the particular desperation of a person who requires other people's validation to feel real, who cannot quite sustain the fiction of themselves without an audience, who has come to depend on being seen in a way that makes her vulnerable to anyone willing to look at her. Blanche Dubois is one of the great literary embodiments of that need, and Marge playing Blanche is the show's way of looking at something it is not usually willing to look at directly, Marge's own need for a life that is recognizably hers. The episode has a parallel plot in which Maggie, deposited at a daycare center while Marge is at rehearsals, leads a rebellion of the other babies against an authoritarian caretaker. This plot prefigures the later theatrical short The Longest Daycare by 20 years and establishes early that Maggie is not a passive infant. But in Season 4, the rebellion plot is played broadly for comedy, and the emotional weight stays with Marge. The climax of the episode involves Homer actually watching his wife perform and understanding, perhaps for the first time in the show's run to that point, that she is a person with a talent he never knew about and desires he never paid attention to. He comes to the performance intending to be bored and finds himself watching a version of his own marriage dramatized on a stage, and he is, briefly, shaken by what he sees. He is Stanley Kowalski. The show does not soften this or qualify it. Homer watches the character who represents him on stage and is forced to recognize something true about the way he occupies his household, the way his comfort and convenience and appetite have structured a domestic world in which Marge's own needs are the thing that gets managed around everything else rather than the thing that gets centered. Homer's response is to grow, a little, temporarily, in the way that Homer always grows during the course of an episode and then returns to baseline by the next one. But the growth is real within the episode, and what it represents is real, and the episode's willingness to use a musical parody of Tennessee Williams as the vehicle for that investigation is one of the stranger and more elegant formal choices in the show's history. The episode from Season 4 that most people name when they talk about Strange is Last Exit to Springfield, which aired on March 11th, 1993. It is the episode where Homer becomes a union leader and negotiates with Mr. Burns over dental coverage, and it is structured as a parody of The Godfather and How the Grinch Stole Christmas simultaneously, a combination that should not work and absolutely does. But what is strange about Last Exit to Springfield is not its structural ambition, it is the dental chair sequence. Lisa has to get braces. The orthodontist, Dr. Wolf, is depicted with a quality of gentle menace that the episode never quite winks away. When Lisa is put in the dental chair and the gas mask comes down, the episode slides into pure surrealism for approximately 90 seconds. She hallucinates. The things she sees, a parade of figures from earlier in the episode transformed into something stranger. A Busby Berkeley number in which teeth become chorus girls, have the texture of a genuine dream, not a parody of a dream but the real thing. The scrambled imagery of a mind under pharmaceutical influence. The show then slides back out of the hallucination and continues the episode as if nothing happened. No acknowledgement, no transition. The dream simply ends and the plot resumes, and if you blinked, you might have missed that the show briefly stopped being a comedy about dental insurance and became a genuine vision. This is one of the show's most consistent techniques in its strangest episodes, the unmotivated return to normal. The surreal interlude does not resolve. It does not comment on itself. It simply happens and then is over, and the world continues, and you are left to carry the image alone, without the show's help in processing it. The image of teeth as dancers, of pain transformed by pharmacology into spectacle, into something that wants to be watched and applauded, is an image that makes a kind of sense that you cannot quite articulate. It means something. The show chose it deliberately, and then it moved on, and the dental coverage negotiation resumed, and Homer went back to threatening Mr. Burns, and the episode ended, and you were left sitting with 30 seconds of pure dream. Season 5 arrived in the fall of 1993 and did not slow down. In fact, Season 5 contains what is arguably the most purely strange episode the show produced in its entire golden age. It is the 14th episode, which aired on January 27, 1994. It is called Deep Space Homer. Homer goes to space. This is the premise. NASA, concerned about declining public interest in the space program, decides that the solution is to send an ordinary American citizen on a shuttle mission. They choose Homer Simpson through a process that is more or less as chaotic as everything Homer is involved in. He goes through training, he gets on the rocket, he goes to space. The episode is brilliant as comedy, but the strange part is the part nobody usually foregrounds in discussions of it. The actual experience of Homer in space, the 20 or so minutes where he is in zero gravity inside the shuttle, where the normal laws of physical cause and effect have been suspended, where the things that usually happen to Homer when he does something stupid happen differently because the environment itself has changed the parameters. Homer breaks an ant farm in the shuttle. This is the inciting disaster, the thing that threatens the mission. The ants escape and float weightlessly through the cabin, and Homer has to manage this without making anything worse, which is not a thing Homer is capable of. And the whole sequence of him trying and failing and accidentally making things better is played against the backdrop of the most inhospitable environment a human being can occupy. Space in this episode is genuinely spacious. The shuttle is genuinely small inside it. When the camera pulls back to show the spacecraft against the infinite dark, there is a real sense of scale, of the profound smallness of the machine, and the enormous indifference of the universe around it. The comedy of Homer's predicament does not cancel this scale. It exists alongside it, and the two things together produce something that is funny and also slightly vertiginous, as if the ground is very far away. There is a scene where Homer floats toward the observation window and looks out at the earth below, and for a moment, just a moment, the episode stops being funny. Homer's face in this scene has a quality of genuine awe that the show's animation sometimes captures and sometimes misses, but here lands perfectly. He is looking at his planet from the outside, the only perspective from which you can see it as a whole thing, and even Homer Simpson, with his crayon-compromised brain and his bottomless capacity for missing the point, cannot entirely miss the point of that view. He says something banal and funny shortly after, because the episode is a comedy and it needs to return to comedy, but the moment of awe is real. It is not undercut. The show lets it stand before it lets Homer ruin it, which means the show is telling you that the awe is what happened and the banality is what Homer added to it. The universe is astonishing. Homer just has a limited vocabulary for astonishment. The Season 5 episode that is strangest in a different way, in a way that is quieter and more domestic and goes places that are harder to name, is the 21st episode, the one that aired on April 14th, 1994. It is called Lady Bouvier's Lover. Grandpa Simpson falls in love with Jacqueline Bouvier, Marge's mother. This is a plot that sounds like pure sitcom mechanics, the old people romance that will be used as a subplot while the main story happens elsewhere. But the episode gives the romance a genuine tenderness that was not required by the premise and is not demanded by the comedy. Grandpa Abe Simpson, in the show's standard deployment of the character, is a rambling, slightly confused old man whose primary function is comedic irrelevance. He tells long stories that go nowhere. He falls asleep mid-sentence. He misremembers his own history in ways that are funny and slightly heartbreaking. He is, in the standard version of the show, a vehicle for jokes about aging and dementia and the particular indignities of being old in a world that has moved past you. In Lady Bouvier's Lover, he is a man who falls in love. He is given a genuine romantic narrative with genuine stakes. A courtship that is treated with the same seriousness the show gives to Homer and Marge's relationship in its best episodes. Abe is articulate about what he feels. He is romantic in an old-fashioned, slightly formal way that is neither parody nor condescension. He takes Jacqueline to a restaurant and talks to her about her life with interest and attention, and she responds to being seen. The complication is Mr. Burns. Burns develops an interest in Jacqueline as well, and because Burns has resources and status that Abe cannot match, the competition becomes immediately unequal. The episode does not pretend otherwise. When Jacqueline chooses Burns over Abe, she is choosing the man who can give her more, the man whose wealth provides a version of security and comfort that Abe, a retired soldier living in a rest home, simply cannot offer. The choice is not romantic. It is practical, and the show does not judge her for it, even as it makes very clear that Abe's loss is real and not comic. There is a moment near the end where Abe watches Jacqueline leave with Burns, and his face contains something that the animation of this period was capable of when it was being its most careful. It is not melodrama. It is just an old man watching something he wanted becoming something someone else has. The quiet, specific sadness of the person who came close but not close enough. The episode resolves in a way that is typical of the show, with a sudden reversal and a last-minute intervention that returns the status quo to something manageable. But what it has done in the course of its 22 minutes is treat an elderly character with a dignity the show did not always extend to Grandpa. And that treatment, that simple act of taking the character seriously for the length of an episode, is its own kind of strange in the context of what the show usually did with him. Season 5 also gives us Homer and Apu, one of the great episodes about commercial trust and the particular dynamics of immigrant life in American retail. It gives us Homer's barbershop quartet, which opens with a preamble that is baffling on first viewing and becomes coherent only slowly, like a memory coming back in pieces. It gives us Bart Gets Famous, in which Bart becomes a one-note celebrity and discovers that fame built on a single catchphrase is a particularly hollow form of recognition. But the episode that deserves the longest, slowest consideration is not any of these. It is Secrets of a Successful Marriage, the 22nd episode of the season, which aired on May 19th, 1994. In this episode, Homer teaches an adult education class about the secrets of a successful marriage and, running out of material, begins sharing increasingly private details about his and Marge's relationship with his students. Marge discovers what he has been doing and asks him to leave the house. Homer sleeps in his car. He sleeps in Bart's treehouse. He wanders through Springfield in a state of genuine loss, not comic exaggeration of loss, but the real feeling of having done something that cannot be undone and not knowing how to undo it. He tells Marge's secrets, which were private because they were intimate, because vulnerability between two people has value precisely because it is not shared with everyone. By sharing them with his class, Homer reduced something sacred to content. Marge's anger in this episode has a different quality from the anger she usually expresses at Homer's failures. This is not exasperation. It is something closer to grief, the particular grief of someone who shared something precious with a person they trusted and discovered that the trust was not what they believed it to be. Homer's eventual return home, the gesture he makes to win his way back, is simple. He tells Marge that the one thing he can offer her, the one thing he can give that no one else can, is that he will love her more than anyone else ever has or will. He is not smart enough to give her much, not organized enough, not reliable enough, not sophisticated enough. But in the department of loving her, specifically, there is nobody in the world who can outperform him. It is an argument that works in the context of the episode, and it is both funny and true, and the fact that it is funny does not diminish that it is true. This is what the golden age of The Simpsons did at its best. It found the place where the joke and the genuine feeling were the same sentence, and it lived there, and somehow that living felt more real than either thing alone would have. That is seasons 4 and 5. The golden age, doing its strange work in its strange corners, being funnier and sadder and more peculiar than it had any right to be. The image of Homer in a treehouse, not knowing how to come home. The sound of Marge's silence, which is its own kind of answer. The ants floating weightless through the shuttle. The view from space of a small blue planet, seen by a man who usually misses the point but did not miss this one. Season 6 is where the show became something that felt genuinely unprecedented, not just in animation but in television broadly. The density of the writing in Season 6, the way individual episodes could operate on 4 or 5 levels simultaneously and reward repeated viewing in ways that were not incidental but designed, the way the show could make you laugh and then 30 seconds later make you feel something you had not expected to feel, and then make you laugh again without any of those registers canceling the others out, this was new. The strangest episode of Season 6 is not a question with a single clean answer, because Season 6 is full of strangeness. It contains Homer the Great, in which Homer joins a secret society called the Stonecutters and discovers that the elaborate rituals of belonging are no guarantee of meaning. It contains And Maggie Makes 3, which reconstructs Homer's memory of Maggie's birth as a story told backward in time, beginning at the end and moving toward it. It contains Bart vs. Australia, which is exactly what it sounds like, and is somehow both the most and least Australian thing ever put on television. But the episode that deserves the longest consideration is the 22nd episode of Season 6, which aired on May 21st, 1995. It is called Round Springfield. It is the episode where Bleeding Gums Murphy dies. Bleeding Gums Murphy, the jazz musician who befriended Lisa in the first season's Moaning Lisa, returns in this episode and dies in it. The two events, the return and the death, happen in close proximity, separated by the length of an episode. He is hospitalized when the episode begins. He dies before it ends. Lisa plays his music at his memorial, and the notes drift up into the clouds, and Bleeding Gums Murphy's face appears in the sky above Springfield, like a jazz Mufasa. And the show plays this moment with complete sincerity, without apology, as if it is the most natural thing in the world for a cloud formation to take the shape of your dead saxophone teacher and tell you that the music lives on. The episode is partly about Bart, who accidentally swallows a jagged metal crustio and has to go to the hospital, and his hospital stay is how he discovers that Bleeding Gums Murphy is in the same building, in the same general state of failing health. Bart buys a copy of Murphy's only album from the hospital gift shop and gives it to Lisa so she can share music with him before he goes. There is a scene in this episode where Lisa plays music for Bleeding Gums Murphy through the wall of his hospital room. She does not see him. He does not see her. They are separated by plaster and institutional distance and the specific geography of a hospital that does not permit 8-year-old visitors in the critical care ward. But the music passes through the wall the way music passes through everything, and he hears it, and the episode shows you his face when he hears it, and what you see there is something that the show did not always manage to achieve, a genuine moment of comfort that contains within it the knowledge that the comfort is also a goodbye. Lisa learns of Murphy's death through a news broadcast. She is alone when she finds out, sitting in front of the television in a room that has gone very quiet. The show does not cut away from this moment. It stays with her for a beat, and the beat is long enough to be uncomfortable, long enough to be real. The cloud formation that follows, the face in the sky, is the show's way of refusing to leave Lisa in that moment of pure loss. It gives her an image to hold, a continuation rather than an ending. This is not realistic. Nobody would claim it is realistic. But it is emotionally true in the specific register of this show, which has always believed that the stories we tell ourselves about the people we lose are their own kind of monument, their own kind of persistence. Bleeding Gums Murphy's face in the clouds above Springfield is the show telling Lisa and the audience that the music does not stop when the musician does. It goes somewhere, maybe not up, maybe not into clouds, but somewhere, into the people who heard it, into the space where something beautiful was. Season 6 also contains Homer's Phobia, which aired not in Season 6 but which deserves mention here because of what it represented. Actually, that episode is from Season 8. Let us stay in Season 6 and talk about the episode called Bart of Darkness, which aired on September 4th, 1994, as the season premiere. The episode is a parody of Rear Window, Hitchcock's classic thriller about a man confined to his apartment who becomes convinced he has witnessed a murder. Bart has broken his leg and is confined to his room for the summer. From his window, he watches his neighbors through a telescope. He becomes convinced that Ned Flanders has murdered his wife Maud. There is a genuine quality of menace in certain sequences of this episode that Hitchcock himself would not have been embarrassed by. The telescope shots, the half-glimpsed actions that could mean anything, the accumulation of suspicious behavior that builds toward a conclusion that turns out to be completely wrong. The episode understands what makes the Rear Window premise work, which is that suspicion is a function of interpretation, that we read meaning into what we observe based on what we expect or fear to see, and that the gap between observation and conclusion is where all the interesting and dangerous things happen. Bart is wrong about Ned, who was digging a grave not for Maud but for a murdered rose garden. The mystery resolves itself into something domestic and innocent, and the dramatic machinery of the thriller dissipates without leaving a body behind. But what the episode has done in the process of building and then releasing its suspense is something slightly unsettling. It has shown you Ned Flanders from the outside, without context, without his cheerful self-presentation, seen through a telescope by someone who is bored and imaginative and who has decided that Ned is hiding something. And seen that way, Ned is frightening. Seen through a lens of suspicion, Ned's goodness looks like concealment. His cheerfulness looks like performance. His tidiness looks like the compulsive order of someone managing a secret. The episode does not follow this through to a dark conclusion. It is a comedy and it resolves comically, but it plants the seed. It suggests that how you look at something determines what you see, and that the same man, the same neighbor, the same cheerful hello across the fence can look entirely different depending on where you are standing when you look at him. That is a seed that the show would water in its treatment of Ned Flanders across the next 3 decades, slowly revealing that there was something more complicated behind the cheerfulness, something that would take years to fully disclose. Bard of Darkness does not disclose it. It just suggests, briefly, that it is there. Season 7 is where things get interesting in ways that are harder to categorize than the previous season's strangeness. Season 7 contains Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 2, which resolves the summer cliffhanger with an answer that satisfied nobody and convinced many people that the show was in on the joke of its own resolution. It contains Marge Be Not Proud, which is one of the most genuinely affecting episodes about shame and parental disappointment in the series. It contains Mother Simpson, which we have discussed elsewhere in the context of Mona's story. The strangest episode of Season 7 is the 14th episode, which aired on February 11th, 1996. It is called Scenes from the Class Struggle in Springfield. Marge buys a Chanel suit at a discount outlet and wears it to a chance encounter with an old classmate who is now wealthy and who invites the family to her country club. The episode is about class aspiration, about the desire to belong to a world you were not born into, about what you sacrifice when you try to perform a social identity that is not originally yours. This is familiar territory for American comedy. The social climbing plot is one of the oldest structures in the genre, but what The Simpsons does with it is stranger than the standard handling. Marge becomes someone slightly different at the country club. Not dishonest, not exactly, but she calibrates herself differently in that environment, damps down certain things and amplifies others, presents a version of herself that is compatible with the social expectations of the place. She does this almost unconsciously, as people do when they are in environments that have a strong gravitational pull toward particular kinds of behavior. The country club expects certain things, and Marge, who is adaptable and socially intelligent in ways the show does not always credit her for, begins to provide them. The suit becomes the episode's central object. The Chanel suit, already a symbol of aspirational elegance, gets altered and re-altered as Marge tries to make it appropriate for successive country club events, until finally it barely resembles the garment she bought, until the original suit has been revised almost out of existence in the service of fitting in. The moment where the suit's condition is revealed to the audience is played for comedy, but the image is genuinely strange. A suit that has been altered so many times that it has lost its identity, that is simultaneously what it was and completely different from what it was, existing in some uncanny middle state between original and copy. It is a little like the ship of Theseus thought experiment made wearable. Homer, meanwhile, discovers that he is a natural at golf, which gives him access to a version of the country club that Marge cannot access through the suit alone. Homer's comfort in the country club world is unsettling to him, and to the audience because Homer should not be comfortable there, and yet he is, because golf is a game that rewards a kind of focused but low-stakes concentration that Homer, surprisingly, can provide when beer is involved. The episode ends with The Simpsons' declining membership when Marge realizes that continuing to belong would require too much revision of who they are. The decision is presented as a return to authenticity, a choice to be who they actually are rather than who the country club wants them to be. But the scene that stays with you is earlier. The scene where Marge watches herself in a mirror at the club in the altered suit and sees someone who looks almost right for this environment, someone who could belong here with a little more alteration, and feels the pull of that almost. The almost is the strange part. Not the failure to fit in, not the recognition that she does not belong, but the moment of almost. The recognition that with just a little more revision she could become something that this place would accept, and the complicated feeling of not being sure whether that would be a triumph or a loss. That ambivalence is something the show returns to across many episodes and many seasons. The question of what it costs to belong somewhere and whether belonging is always worth the cost. Season 7 asks it particularly well. It asks it through a suit, and the suit's answer, raggedy and barely holding together by the end, is as clear as any the show ever gave. Season 7 also contains Two Bad Neighbors, the episode where former President George Bush moves in across the street from The Simpsons and becomes Bart's enemy. This episode is strange in a way that is hard to articulate precisely. It is a satire with a real target, a parody of a recognizable public figure, but it has a surrealist undertow that goes beyond the political comedy. George Bush spanking Bart, Homer and Bush at war across the fence line. The escalating conflict between a cartoon family and a former president of the United States played with complete commitment from both sides, the episode operating as if this is the most natural thing in the world, as if former presidents moving to Springfield is not an absurd premise but simply a thing that happens. What makes it strange is not the premise but the earnestness. Both Homer and the animated George Bush are completely serious about their conflict. Neither one treats it as trivial. The war between them is conducted with full investment, and the episode's comedy comes not from winking at its own absurdity, but from playing the absurdity absolutely straight. There is a quality in this episode that the show had in its best surrealist moments. The sense that the world of Springfield takes itself completely seriously regardless of what is happening in it, that the rules of the universe are consistent even when the content of the universe is completely implausible. Former presidents move to Springfield and go to war with their neighbors. The universe does not blink. Springfield does not pause. The conflict is real and the stakes are real, and when it is over, there is a resolution that makes sense by the internal logic of this world, even if that logic would make no sense anywhere else. That is what we are resting in tonight. The internal logic of a world that makes no external sense but is perfectly consistent within itself. Where wars are fought across fences, and music rises into clouds and suits get altered until they barely resemble themselves, and an old man's face appears in the sky to remind an 8-year-old that the music lives on. Sleep inside that logic tonight. It will hold you, the way Springfield holds everyone who goes there, which is to say imperfectly and warmly and for much longer than you expected. There is a moment in the development of any long-running creative work when it stops being entirely sure what it is. Not in a crisis way, not in a failure way, but in the way that any organism that has been growing long enough eventually encounters the edges of its original parameters and has to decide whether to stay inside them or reach past. Season 8 of The Simpsons is that moment. By Season 8, the show had been on the air for 9 years. It had produced more than 160 episodes. It had refined its style to the point where every element was recognizable, every character's voice precisely calibrated, every joke shaped by a decade of learning what worked, and it had, in the process of all that refinement, become capable of doing things that its earlier self had only been capable of gesturing toward. Season 8 is also the season that began to strain against the Golden Age expectations in ways that became more visible in retrospect. Not because the quality dropped, but because the show started making choices that were stranger, more experimental, more willing to sacrifice the clean satisfaction of a perfectly structured plot for something more interesting and less tidy. The strangest episode of Season 8 is, without meaningful argument, the 19th episode, which aired on April 13, 1997. It is called Homer's Enemy. Frank Grimes, called Grimy by people who like him, is introduced in this episode as a new employee at the Springfield nuclear power plant. He has had a difficult life. He was abandoned as a child. He educated himself through correspondence courses while working to support himself. He has no connections, no family wealth, no inherited advantages. Everything he has earned through effort. He is, by every reasonable standard, a much more competent and capable person than Homer Simpson. He is better at their shared job. He understands how the plant works in ways Homer doesn't and will not. He is precise and disciplined and serious about what he does. And he cannot stand Homer Simpson. Not because Homer is personally cruel to him or because Homer has done anything specific to harm him, but because Homer's existence, Homer's comfortable success in a job he performs catastrophically, Homer's family and house and steady paycheck, and complete obliviousness to how little he deserves any of it, represents something Frank Grimes cannot process. The show usually handles Homer's incompetence as a fact of life in Springfield, something the other characters work around or ignore or treat as an environmental condition rather than a moral offense. Everyone in Springfield has made a kind of peace with Homer being the way Homer is. Frank Grimes has not made that peace, because Frank Grimes is new, because he has not yet absorbed Springfield's strange normalizing logic, because he is seeing Homer clearly for the first time without the accumulated goodwill and lowered expectations that living in Springfield eventually provides. Frank Grimes sees Homer as a catastrophe, as evidence of something deeply wrong with the world's distribution of reward and suffering, as proof that the universe does not care about effort or deserve, that the careless and the lucky will thrive while the careful and the hard-working get everything they deserve and no more. He is right. He is completely right. And the episode knows he is right. And this is what makes the episode one of the strangest things the show has ever done, because it gives Frank Grimes's perspective full weight without making Homer less sympathetic. Homer is still Homer. He is still warm and funny and oblivious and strangely lovable in his total lack of self-awareness. He tries, in his Homer way, to be Frank's friend. He invites Frank to dinner. He is genuinely hurt when Frank rejects the invitation. He does not understand that he is the villain of Frank's story, and he cannot understand it, because understanding it would require a kind of self-knowledge that the crayon in his brain and the decades of radiation exposure have placed outside his reach. The tragedy of Homer's enemy is that both people in the central conflict are right. Frank Grimes is right that Homer does not deserve what he has. Homer is right that he does not mean any harm, and that he genuinely wants to be Frank's friend. These two truths cannot coexist in the same world without one of them destroying the other, and the show resolves this impossibility the only way it can, by killing Frank Grimes. Grimes dies in an act of imitative madness. He watches Homer win a children's model building competition with childlike pride and cannot bear it. He has a breakdown, starts behaving as Homer behaves, touching live electrical wires and saying that he does not need safety gloves because Homer never needs them. And the live wire kills him because Frank Grimes is a real person in a world governed by real physics. And Homer is Homer, protected by something that does not protect ordinary people. The funeral scene that ends the episode is genuinely dark in a way the show had never quite been before. Homer, not meaning to, falls asleep at the funeral and begins to snore, and the other mourners laugh, and Grimes's coffin is lowered into the ground to the sound of laughter at Homer's expense, which is also laughter that belongs to Homer's world and not to Grimes's. Even in death, Grimes cannot escape the terms of Homer's universe. The episode aired, and people talked about it for years afterward, not because it was the funniest episode or because it had the most ambitious plot, because it had done something that very few episodes of very few television shows managed to do. It had looked directly at something uncomfortable about its own premise, the thing that the audience had been quietly accepting for 8 years, and had refused to blink. Season 9 arrives and does something that many fans did not forgive it for at the time, and have still not entirely forgiven it for. It airs The Principal and the Pauper. We have already discussed this episode in the context of the larger Simpsons theories, the way it exposed Springfield's machinery of collective denial, the way it showed the town voting to maintain a comfortable lie rather than accept a disruptive truth. But as a standalone piece of television, as an episode of a show that arrived with expectations built by 8 years of consistent quality, it is strange in a way that goes beyond its thematic content. The episode is strange because it commits. It does not hedge. It does not give itself an escape route. The show reveals that Principal Skinner is an imposter, and then, rather than using the revelation as a one-episode anomaly that gets resolved cleanly and returned to the shelf, it leans into the consequences of the revelation with an almost belligerent sincerity. Judge Snyder's decree, the legal document that makes the lie official and criminalizes the truth, is not a throwaway joke. It is the episode's thesis. The show is using the decree to say something about how communities maintain their stories, about the mechanisms by which inconvenient truths get suppressed, about the role of institutional authority in determining what counts as real. The episode was despised partly because it made Skinner less than he was. Fans had accumulated affection for the principal across 8 seasons of the show, and the revelation that he was Armin Tamzarian, a street punk who stole an identity, seemed to retroactively hollow out everything about him. Every moment of vulnerability, every glimpse of his complicated relationship with Agnes, every instance of his particular brand of cowardly dignity, all of it seemed to become false. But this is exactly what the episode is examining. The feeling that something you cared about has been revealed as fake. The disorientation of learning that the person you knew was always a construction. The question of whether a person who has genuinely become someone, who has lived inside an identity for 20 years, and who has allowed that identity to change him, is less real than the name on the birth certificate they started with. Armin Tamzarian became Seymour Skinner. He was not Seymour Skinner and then became him. The becoming was real. The community that formed around him, the relationships he built, the institution he served, those were real. The question the episode asks and does not answer is whether the reality of the life you lived can supersede the fiction of how it started. Springfield's answer is yes, pragmatically, institutionally, legally. The life is real. The name is real. The real Skinner, who has less claim on Springfield than the fake one, gets put on a train. The episode is strange because the answer is ugly and the show knows it is ugly and presents it as the answer anyway. Not triumphantly. Not with a wink that says, "We know this is wrong." With the flat, resigned acknowledgement that communities do what they do to survive, and what Springfield does is maintain the version of reality that costs it the least to believe. Season 9 also contains one of the most underappreciated episodes in the show's run, the episode called The City of New York versus Homer Simpson, which aired September 21st, 1997, as the season premiere. Homer's car gets parked illegally in New York City, and he has to go retrieve it. The episode is funny. It is very funny in places, and it has the energy of the show firing on all of its best cylinders. But what makes it strange is the treatment of New York itself. Springfield is a fictional place, elastic and impossible, located everywhere and nowhere. New York is real, specific, mappable, existing in the actual world with actual streets and actual buildings. Putting Homer Simpson in contact with that reality creates a friction that the show usually avoids by keeping its world internal to Springfield. The episode does not avoid the friction. It leans into it. Homer's hatred of New York, his childhood experience of being mugged on every corner and terrorized by the city's energy, is treated with the full, absurd conviction that Homer brings to all of his strong feelings. The city pushes back. It does not bend to accommodate Homer the way Springfield does. New York is indifferent to Homer in a way that Springfield, which has been shaped over 9 seasons to accommodate his particular brand of chaos, is not. The Simpsons visiting New York is Springfield visiting reality, and reality is not gentle about the collision. There is also in this season the episode called The Cartridge Family, in which Homer buys a gun. This episode is strange, for the same reason Homer's enemy is strange. It takes Homer's characteristic obliviousness and places it in contact with something that, in the real world, is not charming. Homer with a loaded gun in his household is frightening. The episode knows this and plays the fear and the comedy simultaneously, with a level of discomfort that is deliberate rather than accidental. The resolution, which involves Marge leaving with the children and Homer ultimately giving up the gun, is not entirely satisfying. It resolves the immediate crisis without resolving the question the episode has raised about Homer's fitness to make certain kinds of decisions. He was going to give Bart the gun to play with at one point. The gun almost fell out of his pocket in a crowded parking lot. The episode shows you Homer with a weapon and does not fully reassure you that the weapon is gone from Homer's world in any permanent way. That lack of reassurance is deliberate, and it is strange, and it is honest, and it is one of the things that Season 9 was doing in its stranger moments that would not fully manifest in the show's treatment of itself until considerably later. Rest in the strangeness of Frank Grimes going to his grave. Rest in the legal decree that makes a lie official. Rest in Homer with a gun he does not understand the weight of. These are the strangest corners of the golden era's fading edge. They are not comfortable corners, but they are true ones. By the time Season 10 arrived, in the fall of 1998, something had shifted in the show's metabolism. Not broken, not degraded in the way that critics of this era sometimes argue, but shifted. The show was doing something different from what it had done in the Golden Age, and the thing it was doing differently was related to its relationship with reality. In the Golden Age, the show's absurdism was grounded in emotional truth. The plots could be wildly implausible, but the feelings that drove them were always recognizable, always connected to experiences that the audience had some claim on. Homer going to space was absurd, but Homer's desire to matter, to be recognized for something, to escape the gravity of his ordinary circumstances for just long enough to feel special, was completely real. In Seasons 10 and 11, the absurdism sometimes became the point rather than the vehicle. Episodes were organized around set pieces and jokes rather than around emotional journeys. The machinery of the show continued to function, the character voices were intact, the animation was at its most confident and fluid, but something at the center had become slightly more centrifugal, slightly less anchored. This is not always a flaw. Some of the most genuinely strange and wonderful things the show produced came from this centrifugal period, precisely because it was less bound by the expectations of the Golden Age formula. The strangest episode of Season 10 is the 21st episode, which aired on May 9, 1999. It is called 30 Minutes Over Tokyo. The Simpson family goes to Japan. This is the first episode to take the family to Asia, and it manages to be simultaneously a fairly sharp parody of Western tourism in Japan and a genuinely surreal experience that does not quite feel like a normal episode of The Simpsons. Japan in this episode is depicted with a cartoon logic that is different from Springfield's cartoon logic. Springfield is impossible but internally consistent. Japan, as The Simpsons encounter it, is impossible in a different way. Impossible in the mode of genuinely foreign experience, where the rules are unfamiliar and the context is missing, and everything looks just slightly different from what you expected. The episode sends the family through bullet trains and game shows and robot factories and traditional tea ceremonies and sumo wrestling with a slightly breathless velocity that mirrors the experience of being a tourist in a place that is moving faster than you can track. The comedy is sometimes gentle and sometimes broad, but the underlying experience is one of dislocation, of being a person whose reference points have been removed and replaced with a world that requires different reference points. There is a game show sequence that is genuinely strange in a way that goes beyond parody. The show within the show, where humiliation is the format and the contestants do not have the cultural context to understand the game's rules, is an extreme version of something that is not entirely fictional, the experience of being a foreigner in a context you cannot read, where your performance is being evaluated by standards you do not have access to. The comedy is real, but so is the horror, and they are so closely entangled that separating them becomes impossible. The episode ends with the family being thrown out of Japan and returning home on a raft made of paper, which is played as pure physical comedy, but which also has the logic of a dream, the kind of ending that cannot possibly be the right ending but is somehow the only ending available. Season 10 also contains the episode called Bart the Mother, which aired in September of 1998, and which is, in terms of its emotional register, one of the strangest things the show did in this era. Bart accidentally shoots a bird with a BB gun. The bird is dead because of him. He is devastated in a way that the show does not deflate with comedy. He takes the bird's eggs and tries to hatch them himself, carrying the eggs with him everywhere, protecting them with a kind of fierce parental instinct that the show treats with complete seriousness. The eggs hatch. They contain not birds but lizards, a species that preys on birds. The conservation department wants to destroy them. Bart, who has formed an attachment to the lizards because he was there when they hatched, refuses. The episode's resolution involves the lizards being released into an environment where their natural prey are the pigeons that are currently overpopulating Springfield, which means Bart's act of accidental destruction, the shooting of the bird, has accidentally created the mechanism by which the town's bird population will be protected. The circle is not quite complete. The original bird is still dead, but something living continues because of the destruction. This is a strange kind of redemption, one that does not erase the damage but that allows something to grow from it anyway. The episode takes seriously the question of what you owe to the living things you harm accidentally. It gives Bart a genuine moral crisis and works through it without pretending the crisis is smaller than it is. And then it resolves it in a way that is neither entirely satisfying nor entirely unsatisfying, which is more honest than most of what sitcoms do with moral crises. Season 11 is where the show produced one of its most formally audacious episodes, one that has a legitimate claim on being the strangest thing it ever attempted outside of the Treehouse of Horror format. The episode is the last episode of Season 11, which aired on May 21st, 2000. It is called Behind the Laughter. Behind the Laughter is structured as a VH1, Behind the Music documentary. The Simpson family is presented as a real family who created a television show called The Simpsons and then became famous and then fell apart and then reunited. The episode uses documentary conventions, including talking head interviews, archival footage, dramatic narration, and on-screen text identifying interviewees, to tell the story of the show as if it were a real biographical narrative about real people. This is formally very strange. The show is inside itself, looking at itself from the outside, using a documentary format to tell a story that is simultaneously true and false. The Simpson family is real within the show's universe. The show called The Simpsons is a show within that universe. The documentary pretends to be about the making of the show, which means it is a fiction about a fiction, a documentary about a reality that does not exist, using the documentary format to simulate authenticity for an experience that is entirely invented. The episode plays this with complete deadpan commitment. The talking head interviews are delivered in the register of genuine celebrity documentary, where the subject talks to someone off camera, about their experiences with the performed candor of someone being professionally vulnerable. Homer's interview is particularly good. He discusses the pressures of fame and the collapse of his family's relationships with the specific rhythms of a man who has been through something real and is now at a sufficient distance from it to discuss it without losing control. None of this is real. All of it is performed. And the episode uses the gap between the documentary's claims to authenticity and the reality of what you are watching, which is an animated cartoon family participating in a parody of a documentary format, to make a point that is not quite articulable but is clearly present. Something about how we consume celebrity narratives. Something about how the documentary form creates its own kind of fiction by imposing narrative shape on experience. Something about how the Simpson family, who are not real in any sense that matters, have been received by the audience as real in senses that matter quite a lot. The episode was filmed twice, with different details for different broadcast regions, and the details about Springfield's location change between versions. The show giving you a definitive answer and then giving you a different definitive answer depending on which version you see is the show's most explicit acknowledgement that its own truth is not fixed, that the story it tells about itself is as negotiable as everything else about Springfield. Season 11 also contains Faith Off, an episode about faith healing that is strange in ways that are hard to categorize. And it contains Little Big Mom, in which Marge breaks her leg skiing and Lisa takes over management of the household with ruthless efficiency. And it contains the episode called Saddle Sore Galactica, which is either the show at its most self-referential or its most chaotic, depending on your tolerance for the show making fun of the audience for paying attention to continuity. But the episode that deserves the most careful consideration in this section is the 7th episode of Season 11, which aired on December 12, 1999. It is called 8 Misbehavin'. Apu and Manjula have octuplets. The birth of 8 babies simultaneously turns the couple into minor celebrities and then into property of a local zoo, which houses the babies as an attraction. The episode is about how quickly human beings become content, how the novelty of their existence is packaged and sold and displayed for the amusement of audiences who will move on to the next novelty shortly. There is something genuinely dark underneath this episode's comedy, a darkness that the show in its 11th season did not always allow itself to acknowledge, but that is visible here if you look for it. The octuplets are not characters, they are props. The episode treats them as props because that is how the world of the episode treats them, as spectacle rather than as people. Apu and Manjula's struggle to reclaim their children from the zoo is played as comedy, but the underlying situation, parents whose children have been removed and put on display for commercial purposes, is not funny when you hold it directly. The resolution, which involves Apu and a flamethrower-equipped man named Cletus, is too chaotic and too fast to do justice to the darkness the episode has been sitting in. The show backs away from the harder implications of its own premise, returns to the safety of absurdism, and ends before it has to look too long at what it found. But what it found, in the brief moments where it let itself look, is something about the way that unusual births, unusual lives, unusual circumstances become commodities in a media culture. The octuplets are famous because there are 8 of them. Their parents are temporary celebrities because they produced a statistical anomaly. The zoo curator who owns the babies is simply responding to market demand. The audience watching the babies through zoo glass is simply consuming a product. The whole machine is operating exactly as it was designed to operate, and Apu and Manjula, inside the machine, are discovering that love and parenthood and the basic human claim to raise your own children do not give you any particular leverage over the machine's logic. The show in this season was bumping up against its own cultural moment in ways that it was not always able to fully process, a media landscape that was becoming more interested in reality as content, more interested in ordinary people as spectacle, more interested in the machinery of celebrity as a subject for itself. Springfield was a town that had always been partly about that machinery, and in Season 11, the machinery was becoming harder to ignore. Sleep in the strangeness of that. 8 babies behind zoo glass, a documentary about a cartoon family, a bird shooter who becomes a lizard parent, the centrifugal pull of a show that was slowly, gracefully, and with great skill, becoming something slightly different from what it had been. There is a category of creative work that exists in a state of confident decline. Not failed work, not work that has lost its ability to do what it set out to do, but work that has been operating long enough that certain parts of it have become mechanical while other parts have developed a strange freedom that comes only from having nothing left to prove. The Simpsons in seasons 12 through 14 is the clearest example of this I know of in American television. The show had been declared past its prime by the critical consensus. The Golden Age was being treated as historical fact, the decline was being mapped with precision, the debates about when exactly it went wrong were being conducted with the enthusiasm that fans reserve for arguments that cannot be definitively settled. And in the middle of all this, the show was doing some of the strangest and most formally inventive things it had ever done. Not consistently, not at the density of the Golden Age, but in flashes, in episodes that arrived without warning and did something so unexpected that they briefly reopened the question of what the show was capable of. Season 12 has 21 episodes, and its strangest is not the one most people would name. Most people who name a strange Season 12 episode point to the Treehouse of Horror segments, or to Homer Goes to College, which aired in a previous season anyway. The episode that is strangest in Season 12 is the 9th episode, which aired on January 14th, 2001. It is called HOMR. Homer gets a crayon removed from his brain. We have discussed this episode in the context of the larger theory about Homer's intelligence and its suppression. But as a standalone episode, as a piece of television that stands on its own terms, HOMR is genuinely strange and genuinely moving in ways that are worth sitting with slowly. The premise is medical absurdism. An X-ray reveals a crayon that has been lodged in Homer's frontal lobe since childhood, physically reducing his brain function. The removal restores him to a level of intelligence that is, by any normal standard, superior. He becomes articulate and insightful and capable of genuine abstract reasoning. And he is, as a result, miserable. The episode tracks Homer's intelligence as a kind of illness, not because being smart is bad in itself, but because being smart in Springfield is its own particular form of suffering. Smart Homer sees what dumb Homer could not. He sees his job for what it is. A catastrophically dangerous facility being run with criminal negligence. He sees his town for what it is, a community too damaged to recognize its own damage. He sees his friendships for what they are, relationships built on his willingness to participate in other people's stupidity without judgment. Smart Homer is lonely in a way that dumb Homer never was. Dumb Homer is incapable of loneliness in the philosophical sense because he lacks the cognitive machinery to recognize the gap between what his life is and what it might have been. Smart Homer can see the gap. He can measure it. He can understand, with painful precision, what was lost when the crayon went in. The friendship Homer forms with Lisa in this episode is one of the show's most precisely observed relationships. Lisa has always wanted a father she could talk to on her own level. Someone who understands what she understands, who shares her curiosity and her capacity for analysis. Smart Homer is that father, briefly. They talk about science and art and the nature of consciousness. Lisa laughs at jokes that require context she has never before been able to share with her father. She is, for the first time, not alone in her own household. And then Homer chooses to have the crayon reinserted. He chooses it because being smart in Springfield is unsustainable. Because the clarity that intelligence provides is also a form of isolation. Because he would rather be the Homer everyone knows, limited and oblivious and surrounded by the warm fog of his own incapacity, than be a smarter Homer who can see clearly and is alone in what he sees. He leaves Lisa a note. The note is written in the vocabulary of Smart Homer, precise and articulate, and what it says is that he loves her and that she is never alone even when she feels most alone, and that someday she will find the people who can meet her where she is. Lisa reads the note. Smart Homer is gone. Dumb Homer comes back, and the reset is complete, and the episode ends on the image of Lisa holding the note in a household that has returned to what it always was. This is the cruelest kindness the show ever performed. It gave Lisa what she wanted, briefly, and then took it away in a way that was not the show's fault or Homer's fault or anyone's fault, simply the result of Homer being Homer and Springfield being Springfield, and the limits of what love can build when the builder lacks the tools. Season 12 also contains the episode called Tennis the Menace, and the episode called Worst Episode Ever, and the episode called New Kids on the Bleck, in which Bart joins a boy band. But the episode that is strangest in a way that does not get discussed enough is the 15th episode of Season 12, which aired on April 1st, 2001. It is called Hungry, Hungry Homer. Homer discovers that the Springfield Isotopes, the local minor league baseball team, are planning to secretly relocate to Albuquerque. He goes on a hunger strike to expose the truth. Nobody believes him, and nobody cares, and the hunger strike proceeds in complete obscurity while the team owner continues with the relocation plans. There is a scene in the middle of this episode that is strange in the quiet, precise way that the show is sometimes capable of in its less celebrated seasons. Homer, days into a hunger strike that no one is attending to, sits alone in front of the ballpark with a sign and a lawn chair. A single child walks by. The child does not understand what a hunger strike is. Homer explains, and the child leaves, and Homer is alone again, and the camera holds on him sitting in front of the empty stadium in the late afternoon light. It is not a famous scene. It is not quoted or celebrated, but it contains something real about what it looks like when a person cares about something that no one else cares about in the same way. About the specific loneliness of fighting for a truth that does not have an audience, about persistence in the absence of recognition. Homer Simpson, sitting alone with a protest sign in front of an empty stadium, is a stranger image than most of what the show produced in its explicitly surrealist moments. Because the situation is completely mundane and completely real, and the loneliness it depicts is the ordinary loneliness of caring about things that other people do not care about, which is a feeling that the show's audience knows, and that the show itself knows, and that it is here, in this small, unannounced moment, choosing to acknowledge. Season 13 is a season that the critical consensus largely skips over, but it contains the episode called Brawl in the Family, and the episode called The Sweetest Apu, and the episode called Jaws Wired Shut. None of these are the strangest episode of the season. The strangest episode of Season 13 is the 14th episode, which aired on March 17, 2002. It is called A Hunka Hunka Burns in Love. Mr. Burns falls in love. This is the premise. Burns, who in the standard deployment of the character is a figure of pure concentrated power and ruthlessness, a man whose emotional range is limited to avarice and contempt and the occasional misanthropic whimsy, falls in love with a younger woman named Gloria and becomes, in the course of the episode, a person who is capable of vulnerability. The episode is strange because it is tender toward Burns in a way that the show had rarely been before. Not satirically tender, not tenderness as a setup for a joke at Burns' expense, but genuinely tender, as if the show is examining whether Burns contains the capacity for love and finding, to its apparent surprise that he does. Gloria is played as a real person with her own perspective on the situation. She is not simply the object of Burns' affection. She has preferences and history and a complicated present tense that includes an ex-boyfriend who is also, in the show's Springfield logic, a connection to the criminal world. She responds to Burns' attention with genuine warmth, not because he is wealthy or powerful, but because he treats her with a courtesy that she perhaps has not always received. The episode ends badly for Burns, as it was always going to, because the show cannot sustain the idea of Burns in a successful romantic relationship without fundamentally changing who he is. But the ending is not cruel to him. It acknowledges the reality of what he felt, the genuine quality of his vulnerability during the episode, and treats his loss with something that approaches dignity. There is a scene where Burns is alone in his mansion after the relationship has ended, and the mansion, which is usually filmed as a place of gothic grandiosity, a testament to excess and power, suddenly looks enormous and empty in a way that is not funny. The space that usually functions as an emblem of Burns' dominance becomes, in this scene, evidence of his solitude. He has everything, and he is alone in all of it, and the show holds that image for a moment without making a joke of it. That moment is why the episode is worth discussing in the context of the show's strangest work. Not because it does anything formally experimental, but because it sees Burns differently, just for a moment, and the different view is more complicated and more human and more melancholy than the standard view, and then it looks away again, and Burns goes back to being Burns. And the melancholy recedes. Season 14 contains the episode called The Dad Who Knew Too Little, and the episode called The Strong Arms of the Ma, and the episode called Barting Over, in which Bart legally emancipates himself from his parents. But the strangest episode of Season 14 is the 19th episode, which aired on April 20th, 2003. It is called Old Yellerbelly, Santa's Little Helper. The Simpson family dog, who has been a fixture of the household since the show's first episode, is revealed in this episode to be a coward. When a fire breaks out and the family is in danger, Santa's little helper flees rather than staying to help. This is treated as a catastrophic betrayal by Homer, who replaces the dog with a braver animal. The episode is strange because it takes the premise of Santa's little helper's cowardice seriously. The dog is genuinely afraid. The show depicts the fear in a way that is neither comic nor entirely sympathetic, just accurate. Dogs can be afraid. Animals can fail the expectations of the humans who depend on them. Santa's little helper, who has been in the background of Springfield for 14 seasons accumulating the audience's goodwill, is revealed in this episode to be a dog who will not run into a burning building. This is the most honest thing the show has ever said about Santa's little helper. Of course, the dog would not run into a burning building. He is a dog. He is afraid of fire, as any sensible living thing is afraid of fire. The expectation that he should be brave in ways that exceed his biology, that he should perform the emotional function of the heroic animal companion without reference to what an actual dog can be expected to do in a dangerous situation, is the episode's subject. The disappointment Homer feels is real, but the disappointment is based on a fantasy about what dogs are, and the episode gently and persistently refuses to let Homer, or the audience, maintain that fantasy. Santa's little helper's rehabilitation in the episode comes not from learning to be brave, but from discovering that he has a talent the family can value, which is comedy. He becomes a mascot rather than a hero. He finds his place not in the category of things Homer imagined him to be, but in a category that fits what he actually is. This is less emotionally satisfying than the standard resolution of a dog story, where the animal proves itself brave after all, but it is more true. Sleep in the strangeness of these seasons. The crayon going back in, the empty stadium, Burns alone in his enormous house, the dog who would not run into the fire. This is the show finding strange, true things in the margins of seasons that its own audience had largely stopped believing in. There is a way of watching The Simpsons in its middle seasons, the 15th through the 17th, that requires you to adjust your expectations in a specific direction. Not downward exactly, sideways. These seasons are operating in a mode that is different from the Golden Age, and if you come to them expecting the Golden Age, you will find them wanting. But if you come to them expecting something else, something stranger and less bounded and less concerned with the formal perfection of the peak years, you find that they are doing things that the Golden Age could not or would not do. The strangest episode of Season 15 is the 7th episode, which aired on November 30th, 2003. It is called "'Tis the 15th Season." The episode is a Christmas episode, and it is built around Homer receiving a gift of a watch so expensive that it requires him to sell his Christmas gifts to the family in order to afford it. Homer, feeling guilty about this, decides to become the nicest man in Springfield, to outgood Ned Flanders and thereby claim the moral high ground that Ned has occupied for 15 years. The competition between Homer and Ned that the episode builds is funny in the specific way that competition between people who have completely different natural modes of being can be funny. Homer's niceness is performed, sustained by will and caffeine and the burning desire to beat Ned at something. Ned's niceness is, as the show established in its examination of his psychological history, also somewhat performed, sustained by decades of behavioral conditioning. Neither man's goodness is entirely natural. Both men are working at it, from different starting points and with different resources. But the episode's strangest moment comes when Homer's campaign of niceness encounters its own limits. There is a sequence in the middle of the episode where Homer does something genuinely nice for someone and receives no recognition for it, and his response is a flash of genuine frustration rather than continued serenity. The serenity is a costume, and the costume slips, and what you see underneath is Homer being Homer, wanting credit for his goodness, in the way that Homer always wants credit for everything. The episode does not condemn this. It presents it as inevitable and also as something more complicated than simple self-interest. Homer's desire to be seen as good is inseparable from his desire to actually be good. He is not performing niceness while being secretly selfish. He is trying to become nicer by performing niceness, using the performance as a practice that he hopes will eventually become genuine. This is actually how virtue ethics works. This is the mechanism by which people change their characters through practiced action, rather than internal resolution. Homer's experiment fails not because the mechanism is wrong, but because his particular character lacks the patience to sustain the practice long enough for it to stick. He reverts to Homer, which is both the comedy of the episode and its diagnosis. Season 15 also contains the episode called "The Ziff Who Came to Dinner," which is about Artie Ziff, Marge's prom date from a flashback episode in the Golden Age. Artie returns as a broken figure, having squandered a fortune in an Enron-adjacent collapse, seeking shelter in the Simpson attic. He is no longer the smug and wealthy figure from the memory of the prom. He is diminished and desperate and still, underneath the desperation, exactly himself, which is to say still somewhat insufferable in the specific way of a man who has always believed his own intelligence entitled him to more than he received. The episode is an examination of what happens to arrogance when the external structures that supported it collapse. Artie without his money is still Artie, which is both sad and faintly reassuring. He has not become humble. He has become humiliated, which is different. Humiliation is what happens to arrogance when the world stops cooperating with it. Humility is a voluntary reduction of the self. Artie is not humble. He is just broke. The resolution of the episode is legally complicated in a way that plays for comedy, but that has a genuinely strange undertow. The show is not quite sure whether to sympathize with Artie or judge him, and that uncertainty, which manifests as an ending that does not quite decide how to feel about what has happened, is more honest than a cleaner resolution would have been. Season 16 is a season that critical consensus tends to dismiss, but it contains one episode that is strange in a way that has not received sufficient attention. The episode is the 20th, which aired on April 17, 2005. It is called Home Away from Homer. Ned Flanders rents out his spare room to two young women who turn out to be filming content for an early internet video website. The content is not illegal, but it is suggestive, and when the town discovers what has been happening in Ned's house, Ned becomes the subject of widespread mockery. He cannot bear it. He moves away from Springfield to a new town, Humbleton, whose residents are all as aggressively cheerful and community-minded as Ned himself. The episode is strange because Humbleton is a nightmare, not in any dramatic way, not in the way of a horror film or a dystopian satire, but in the quieter way of a place where the social expectations are so fully internalized by every resident that there is no space for the ordinary friction and resentment and honest interaction that make a community real. Humbleton is Springfield without conflict, and without conflict, it is empty. It is cheerfulness without content, goodness without the difficulty that gives goodness its meaning. Ned cannot stay in Humbleton. He returns to Springfield. He returns to a neighborhood where Homer will be ridiculous and infuriating and occasionally cruel and always present, where being a good neighbor actually costs something because the neighbor is not automatically cooperative, where virtue is tested by real friction rather than maintained in a frictionless environment. This is the strangest thing about Ned Flanders that the show occasionally acknowledges and usually backs away from. He needs Springfield. He needs the difficulty of it. The goodness he has cultivated across decades, the patience and the charity and the forgiveness that is at once genuine and conditioned, it only means something because it is being exercised against real resistance. Take away the resistance, place him in Humbleton where everyone is already good, and Ned's goodness has nothing to push against and therefore has nothing to be. He is in a way defined by Homer. Homer's chaos is the friction against which Ned's virtue sharpens itself. Without Homer next door, Ned is just a man with a clean house and a pleasant disposition in a town full of men with clean houses and pleasant dispositions. He is nobody in particular. The episode does not say this explicitly. It arrives at it sideways, through Ned's discomfort in Humbleton and his relief at returning to a street where the neighbor is already at the door with a chainsaw and a beer. But the implication is visible if you let yourself see it, and it is strange, and it reframes something about the show's central dynamic that the show is usually not willing to name. Season 17 contains the episode called Bart Has Two Mommies, and the episode called Homer Simpson, This Is Your Wife, and the episode called My Big Fat Geek Wedding. The strangest episode of Season 17 is the 14th episode, which aired on March 19, 2006. It is called Bart Gets a Z. Bart's teacher, Miss Krabappel, is fired after Bart gets her drunk. He is responsible for her job loss. He feels guilty about it in the specific way that Bart feels guilty about things, which is briefly and with more intensity than he typically shows about anything else, and then he tries to do something about it. What the episode does with this setup is interesting. It gives Krabappel a genuine arc, not just an episode plot. She leaves teaching, opens a muffin shop, discovers that the muffin shop is not fulfilling, and eventually has to decide whether she wants her old life back. The episode treats her decision as genuinely uncertain, as something she has to think through rather than something that the plot predetermines. Krabappel has been teaching 4th grade at Springfield Elementary for 17 years of the show's run. She has been, in her standard deployment, a figure of weary cynicism, a woman who entered the profession with some idealism and has had it slowly removed by decades of Bart Simpsons and inadequate funding and administrative absurdity. The episode examines what that weariness means, whether it constitutes burnout or simply honesty, whether the cynicism is a symptom of something gone wrong or an accurate reading of a situation that is genuinely as bad as it looks. Krabappel's return to teaching at the end of the episode is not triumphant, it is quiet. She goes back because the alternative is not better, not because she has rediscovered her passion or because Bart's contrition has healed something in her. She goes back because this is what she does and who she is, and the muffin shop is not who she is. This is a strange kind of resolution. It does not restore the pre-episode status quo through a journey of discovery. It restores it through something closer to resignation, through the recognition that some lives are not structured around passion or purpose but simply around the accumulation of what you have already become, and that this is not nothing, and that continuing is its own kind of choice. Season 17 also contains the seemingly never-ending story, which is one of the most formally elegant episodes the show produced in this era. The episode is structured as a series of nested stories, stories within stories, each one containing the previous ones, each one adding context and complication to the ones that came before. Homer and the family are trapped in a cave during a tour. To pass the time, Marge tells a story. In the story, a character tells another story. In that story, another character tells yet another story. The show tracks the nesting without losing the thread, building a structure where each layer of narrative is simultaneously complete on its own terms and part of a larger pattern. The structure is an homage to the nested narrative tradition in literary fiction, the Canterbury Tales model, the Scheherazade model, the idea that stories told inside other stories create a depth that linear storytelling cannot achieve. The Simpsons doing this in a cave with flashbacks is both a parody of that tradition and a genuine use of it. The stories actually fit together. The layers actually complicate each other. The joke of using the Canterbury Tales structure for a Simpsons episode does not prevent the structure from working. There is something quietly wonderful about the show. In its 17th season, choosing to attempt something this formally sophisticated, not because it needed to prove something, not because the audience was demanding it, just because the structure was interesting and the writers wanted to try it. That impulse, to try something interesting even when you do not need to, even when the audience would not notice if you did not, is one of the stranger and more admirable things about The Simpsons in its middle seasons. The show kept experimenting, kept attempting formal risks, kept doing things that were strange and unexpected in the margins of seasons that its critical audience had largely written off. Sleep in the strangeness of that. The Scheherazade structure in a Springfield cave, the empty cheerfulness of Humbleton, the muffin shop that is not enough, Homer's niceness slipping to reveal Homer underneath. These seasons are not the golden age. They are something older and stranger, a show that has lived long enough to stop caring about being perfect and started caring about being interesting. And sometimes that trade is the better one. Season 18 arrived in the fall of 2006, and by this point the show had been on the air for 17 years. It had produced more than 370 episodes. The audience watching new episodes was largely made up of people who had grown up with the show, who had a relationship to it that was less about what it was currently doing and more about what it had been, who carried a specific version of Springfield inside them that had formed during the years they watched most closely, and that newer episodes were always being measured against. This is an unusual position for a creative work to occupy. Most creative works are experienced in a roughly linear way. You encounter them, you form a relationship with them. The relationship changes as both you and the work develop. The Simpsons had been on the air long enough that different audience members had formed their primary relationship with entirely different versions of the show. And all of those different primary relationships were being brought to the same new episodes, each of which was inevitably going to be a different kind of disappointment to a different segment of the audience. In this context, the show's willingness to experiment, to do strange things, to attempt episodes that were formally unusual or emotionally unresolved or thematically ambitious in ways that might not pay off, was both courageous and slightly irrelevant. The audience that cared most deeply about the show was often the audience least able to see what the show was attempting, because they were comparing it to a version of itself that had been elevated by nostalgia and retroactive quality sorting into something it had never quite been at the time. Season 18 contains, in this environment, some of the most formally adventurous episodes the show had produced since its golden age. The strangest of these, and arguably the strangest episode the show produced in this entire three-season stretch, is the 9th episode, which aired on December 17, 2006. It is called Eternal Moonshine of the Simpson Mind. Homer wakes up on his front lawn with no memory of the previous evening. This is the premise. What the episode does with it is unusual. Homer retraces the previous night's events through a series of fragmented, non-linear flashbacks, each of which adds information about what happened without adding certainty about what it means. The episode is structured like a fractured memory, with cuts that do not follow the conventional logic of flashback sequences, that jump between moments without establishing the causal connections between them, that let the audience feel what it would feel like to reassemble an evening from fragments, rather than showing them the reassembled evening from a comfortable narrative distance. The technique is not unprecedented in film, but it was unusual in animated television, and the show uses it not as a stylistic flourish but as an emotional strategy. Homer cannot remember what happened. The experience of watching the episode is the experience of not remembering, of catching at fragments, of trying to construct a whole from incomplete pieces. You are inside his disorientation rather than watching it from outside. What Homer eventually reconstructs is a story about a fight with Marge, about misunderstandings that escalated in the specific way that misunderstandings escalate between people who know each other extremely well, who can use their knowledge of each other as precision instruments for causing pain when they are angry enough to do so. The fight was serious. The aftermath was serious. And Homer's memory of it was obliterated by exactly the kind of evening that a man obliterates his memory with when he does not want to remember what he did. The episode ends not with resolution but with Homer deciding to trust what he knows about his life rather than what he can remember. He knows that Marge loves him. He knows that his family is real. He knows these things not as memories, which have failed him, but as something more fundamental, as the bedrock conviction on which he has built whatever stability his life contains. There is a visual sequence toward the end of the episode that involves Homer jumping off a bridge into the river below, and the sequence is filmed with a quality of dreamlike slow motion that the show had rarely used before. Homer falling through the air above the river. The silence of the fall. The water approaching. It is genuinely beautiful in a way that the show did not often achieve in this era, and it is used in service of an emotional moment that earns the beauty. Season 19 contains the episode called The Homer of Seville, in which Homer becomes an opera singer, which is the kind of premise that the show had been generating for 19 years, but which still manages to produce something strange and specific. The episode uses Homer's improbable opera talent as a way to examine celebrity culture, specifically the way that celebrity generates a parasocial intensity in certain fans that tips over into something dangerous. There is a sequence in the episode where Homer's fan, a woman who has become obsessed with him, explains the logic of her obsession with a precision and self-awareness that is more disquieting than comic. She understands that her feelings are not rational. She understands that the object of her obsession is not the person she believes him to be. She understands all of this, and it does not matter. The understanding has no bearing on the feeling, and the feeling is what determines her behavior. This is strange coming from an animated comedy, and the episode does not dwell in the strangeness, but the strangeness is there, visible beneath the joke structure, a brief and accurate look at something that the show is usually too committed to being funny to examine this directly. Season 19 also contains the episode called That 90s Show, which is one of the most controversial episodes the show has produced in its post-Golden Age run, not because it is bad, which it is not, but because it is actively incompatible with established continuity in ways that cannot be explained away. The episode is a flashback to Homer and Marge's young adulthood in the 1990s, which directly contradicts the earlier flashback episodes that established their youth in the 1970s and 80s. The two versions of their shared history are genuinely irreconcilable. The show did not make a mistake. It looked at the floating timeline and the accumulated continuity conflicts it had generated and decided to make the conflict explicit, to produce an episode that could not coexist with existing continuity, to embrace the irreconcilability. This is strange. It is also, viewed from the right angle, honest. The floating timeline had always meant that Homer and Marge's past was not fixed, that their shared history would need to be revised as the present moved forward. Every revision of their backstory contradicted some previous version. That 90s show simply made the contradiction visible rather than soft-pedaling it, made it the subject of the episode rather than an awkward byproduct of the episode. The strangest part of that 90s show is how much it commits to the era it depicts. The grunge references, the Clinton-era cultural touchstones, Homer's brief period as a musician, it is all rendered with the same affectionate specificity that the earlier flashback episodes had rendered the 70s and 80s. The show treats the 90s version of Homer and Marge's youth as equally real, equally valid, equally worth visiting, even though it is incompatible with the version that came before. What does that incompatibility mean? Is it creative laziness? Is it formal experimentation? Is it the show admitting that the floating timeline has always made the past conditional rather than fixed? That every flashback episode has always been provisional? That the real Homer and Marge never had a single definitive youth, but have always had whatever youth the current episode required? I think it is the third thing, and I think the show knew it was the third thing when it made the episode. The past of Springfield is as elastic as its geography. The town has no fixed location. Its characters have no fixed history. Only the present tense is ever fully real in Springfield. And even that changes from episode to episode according to the dream logic of a show that has been running long enough to become its own kind of time. Season 20 contains the episode called Sex, Pies, and Idiot Scrapes, and the episode called Lost Verizon, and the episode called Double Boy in Trouble. The strangest episode of Season 20 is the 7th episode, which aired on November 23, 2008. It is called My Pods and Broomsticks. Bart befriends a Muslim family who have recently moved to Springfield. Homer becomes convinced they are terrorists. The episode is a direct engagement with post-September 11th Islamophobia, with the paranoia and casual prejudice that attached itself to Muslim Americans in the years following the attacks, and it handles this engagement with a mixture of comedy and genuine moral seriousness that the show had not always managed in its social commentary. The strange part of the episode is not its political content but its formal commitment. The show does not soften Homer's prejudice into something charming or accidentally correct. His suspicions are wrong. They are wrong in the ways that this specific kind of prejudice is wrong, not because of a plot twist that reveals a hidden truth beneath the surface, but simply because the family is exactly who they appear to be. Ordinary people doing ordinary things. And Homer is wrong about them in the straightforward way that prejudice is wrong, by substituting a category for a person. The friendship between Bart and the Muslim boy at the center of the episode is given genuine warmth, not the performed warmth of a very special episode, but the casual warmth of two kids who like each other and who do not have the cultural machinery to see each other through the lens that their parents' generations use. The episode ends with Homer remaining somewhat unconvinced, not fully reformed, not delivered to a moment of complete clarity where his prejudice dissolves. He is better than he was, slightly, temporarily. The show does not give him the dramatic enlightenment that would make the episode tidy. It gives him the small, imperfect movement towards something better that actually characterizes how people change, when they change at all. The episode called Eternal Moonshine of the Simpson Mind that we discussed earlier is the formal high point of this 3-season stretch, but it is not the only episode in this period that is doing something formally interesting. Season 18 contains the episode called 24 Minutes, which is a parody of the television drama 24, and which uses the real-time format and the split-screen visual conventions of that show to tell a story about a bake sale at Springfield Elementary. The parody is good, the split screens are funny, but what is strange about the episode is how completely the show commits to the formal language it is parodying, how thoroughly it inhabits the visual grammar of 24, so thoroughly that by the end of the episode you are no longer entirely sure whether you are watching The Simpsons doing a parody of 24 or whether you are watching an episode of 24 that happens to be animated and to be about a bake sale. The effect is disorienting in an interesting way. The show has borrowed enough of 24's visual language that 24's emotional grammar comes with it. The sense of urgency, the implication that the stakes are real, the feeling that what you are watching matters. None of these things are true. The stakes are a bake sale, but the emotional grammar says otherwise, and you feel it despite knowing better. This is what happens when a show with enough formal sophistication borrows the conventions of another genre. The borrowed conventions carry their emotional implications with them, and those implications do not automatically dissolve just because the content is comic. 24 Minutes is funnier because of this. The comedy of the gap between the urgency of the form and the triviality of the content. But it is also slightly stranger. The parody is earnest enough to generate the feelings it is parodying, which means you are feeling something real, and the real feeling is about a bake sale. Sleep in these strange, careful, experimental seasons. Homer forgetting what he did, the past being rewritten for the third time. A family that may or may not be dangerous, watched by a man who does not know the difference between a person and a category. The show at 20, still trying things, still finding new corners of Springfield to explore, still occasionally discovering something in those corners that it did not expect. There is a critical rehabilitation happening, slowly, around the later seasons of The Simpsons. Not a complete reversal of the consensus, not a return to Golden Age status, but a growing recognition that the seasons roughly spanning the show's 21st through 24th years contain episodes that are genuinely excellent, not just competent, not just nostalgically pleasant, but actually excellent, in ways that would be recognized as such if they were attached to a show that had not spent a decade being declared past its prime. Part of what makes this recognition difficult to articulate is that the excellence of these seasons is different in kind from the excellence of the Golden Age. The Golden Age episodes were dense and layered and operated on multiple levels simultaneously. The best episodes of the 21st through 24th seasons are often simpler than that, more focused, more willing to spend 22 minutes on a single emotional question rather than weaving together 4 or 5 narrative threads. The ambition is more concentrated. The execution is correspondingly more visible. The strangest episode of Season 21 is the 10th episode, which aired on January 10th, 2010. It is called Dial N for Nerder. The episode's main plot involves Bart and Lisa accidentally knocking Martin Prince off a cliff while hiking and then covering up their responsibility for his disappearance. This is a genuinely dark premise for a Simpsons episode, darker than the show usually allows itself to go in its main plots, and the episode follows through on the darkness without entirely deflating it. Martin is not dead. He has survived by living in the wilderness and is making his way back to Springfield. But Bart and Lisa do not know this, and their guilt about what they believe they have done drives the episode's main emotional logic. They are covering up what they believe to be a death. They are lying to their parents and their community about their role in a tragedy that turns out not to be a tragedy. The strange part is the quality of the guilt, specifically Bart's guilt. Bart has done many things across 21 seasons that should have produced guilt of this magnitude, and the show has usually handled his guilt as a comedic element, something that produces funny consequences and then resolves. Here, the guilt is more textured. There is something in how the episode portrays Bart's experience of believing he is responsible for someone's death that goes beyond the standard guilt comedics, something that approaches genuine horror, not performed for laughs but actually present. The resolution, which involves Martin returning from the wilderness and revealing that he has been fine, releases the tension in the expected way, but does not entirely dispel what the episode has been building. You have been inside Bart's guilt for long enough that the relief of the revelation does not fully overwrite the experience of the dread. Season 21 also contains the episode called Judge Me Tender, and the episode called The Bob Next Door, which is a Sideshow Bob episode that does something with the character that the show had not done before. It gives Bob a plan that is genuinely clever. Bob arranges to swap faces with his cellmate, another prisoner, so that he can pursue Bart while technically being a different person. The face swap plot is played at the boundary between body horror and comedy, and the show commits to both registers without resolving the tension between them. There is something about the face swap premise that is stranger than most of what the Sideshow Bob episodes attempt. Bob's face on another body, another face on Bob's body. The questions about identity and recognition that this raises, about whether a person is their face or something underneath the face, about whether Bart would know Bob without the face, about whether there is something in the essential Bobness that survives the face that he has temporarily given away. The episode does not dwell on these questions, but they are visible if you want them to be. Season 22 contains the episode called Elementary School Musical, and the episode called Lona Lisa, and the episode called Money Bart. The strangest episode of Season 22 is the 21st episode, which aired on May 15th, 2011. It is called 500 Keys. The episode is an anthology of sorts, following each member of the Simpson family as they discover what their forgotten collection of old keys opens. This structure allows the episode to run 4 parallel stories without committing to any of them as the main event, producing something that feels less like a conventional episode and more like a series of vignettes connected by the thematic thread of doors and secrets and the things you lock away and then lose track of. The vignette that is strangest is Bart's. One of his keys opens a door in Springfield Elementary that leads to a hidden room. A room that should not exist by any logical account of the school's layout, a room that contains evidence of an old secret from the school's history. The secret, when revealed, is played for comedy, but the room itself, the existence of hidden space within a building Bart has inhabited for over 2 decades, has a quality of genuine strangeness. Hidden rooms in familiar places are a reliable generator of uncanniness. The places we spend our time become, through familiarity, maps of the known. We believe we know them. We stop paying attention to their details because we have already cataloged them. Finding a room that does not appear on our internal map, a room that the familiar place has been hiding from us, produces a specific disorientation that is hard to describe and immediately recognizable when experienced. Bart's discovery of the hidden room is this feeling in cartoon form. He has been in Springfield Elementary for 22 seasons. He knows its corridors and classrooms and boiler room with the intimacy of long habitation. And there is a room he has never been in, has never known existed, tucked behind a door he has walked past without knowing what it was. What else might Springfield be hiding, in its corners and behind its familiar facades? The show does not ask this explicitly, but the question is there, implied by the room, hanging in the air of the episode after the comedy has moved on. Season 23 contains the episode called The Food Wife and the episode called At Long Last Leave, which is the show's 500th episode and which involves the entire town voting to exile the Simpsons from Springfield. This is a premise that acknowledges, with genuine directness, something the show had been circling for years, that the Simpson family and Springfield have a complicated symbiotic relationship, that the town has accommodated the family's chaos for so long, that the question of what life would look like without them is genuinely interesting. The episode is partly a clip show celebrating 500 episodes and partly a story about the Simpsons discovering that they are not welcome in the town they have lived in all their lives. It is strange because it takes seriously the idea that Springfield would be better off without the Simpsons, that the chaos they generate has genuine costs for the people around them, that the warmth of the family at the center does not automatically neutralize the damage at the periphery. The episode resolves with the family returning to Springfield, as episodes always resolve, but the resolution has a slightly different quality from the standard reset. The family has been shown that their place in Springfield is not guaranteed, that their belonging is contingent rather than natural, that the community they have always taken for granted is not obligated to have them. Season 24 contains, in its 8th episode, the episode called To Cur with Love, which aired on December 2, 2012. This episode is about Santa's little helper and tells, in flashback, the story of how the dog came to matter so much to Homer. The episode is strange because it is genuinely sentimental in a way that the show rarely allows itself. Not falsely sentimental, not the performed sentimentality of a very special episode, but actually, honestly, purely sentimental. Homer's relationship with the dog is not played for irony. The affection is real. The history is rendered with care. The episode goes back to a moment in Homer's childhood when he was lonely in a specific way that children who do not quite fit anywhere are lonely, and it shows how the companionship of an animal can be the thing that holds a person together when nothing else is offering to. The show doing this without apology, without the usual protective layer of comedy, without signaling that the sentiment is supposed to be funny, is the strange part. By season 24, the show had been ironic for long enough that choosing to be sincere required a kind of commitment that was its own form of formal risk. To Cur with Love takes that risk, and the episode it produces is not embarrassing and not maudlin. It is simply true. It is an episode about love, specifically the love between a person and an animal, told straight, with the confidence of a show that had been alive long enough to know when irony was not the right tool. Sleep in the quietness of that, the hidden room in the familiar school. The 500th episode's acknowledgement that belonging is earned, not automatic. The pure sentiment of a man remembering why his dog matters. These seasons are doing something that the critical consensus has not fully credited them for. They are being true, in their specific way, to the specific truth that has always been at the center of this show, and they are doing it with more care and less noise than before. Season 25 arrived in the fall of 2013, and it produced something that is difficult to categorize within the history of the show and also difficult to categorize within the history of animated television. The episode is the 20th episode of the season, which aired on May 4th, 2014. It is called Brick Like Me. The premise is that Homer wakes up in a version of Springfield made entirely of Lego bricks. Everyone is made of bricks. Every building, every vehicle, every environment is rendered in the distinctive blocky aesthetic of the Lego universe. The episode was produced in actual Lego animation for the Springfield scenes, making it both a parody of Lego culture and a formally realized artifact of the aesthetic it is parodying. This is strange for reasons that go beyond the novelty of the format. Lego Springfield is not simply a visual joke. The episode uses the Lego aesthetic to examine something about the relationship between construction and emotion, between the things we build and the feelings that motivate us to build them. Homer, it turns out, has retreated into Lego Springfield as a psychological refuge. The real Springfield, the real version of his family, is in the process of changing in ways that Homer finds unbearable. Lisa is growing up. The father-daughter connection that has always been one of the tenderest things the show contained is evolving into something different. Something that requires Lisa to move away from Homer toward her own life, and Homer cannot bear to watch it happen. Lego Springfield is a place where things do not change, where everything can be built exactly as you want it and taken apart and rebuilt if it goes wrong, where the daughter is always young and the father is always needed. It is, in the terms of the theories we discussed at the beginning of this video, a version of the coma dream logic, a created world that exists to prevent the dreamer from having to confront what the real world contains. The episode's resolution involves Homer accepting that Lisa is growing up and that his love for her needs to grow with her, rather than trying to hold her in a static arrangement of Lego bricks. This resolution is predictable in its emotional outline. What is not predictable is how cleanly and quietly the episode earns it, using the formal device of the Lego world not as a gimmick but as a genuine metaphor for the relationship between parental love and the fear of change. There is a sequence near the end of the episode where Homer dismantles the Lego Springfield piece by piece, and as he dismantles it, the real Springfield reassembles around him, brick by brick, replaced by the familiar painted lines and curved shapes of the show's actual animation style. The transition from one version of Springfield to the other is visual and formal and also emotional. It is about Homer choosing reality over his constructed refuge, about accepting what the real world looks like rather than substituting the version he can control. That is a genuinely moving sequence. It is moving because the formal device, the Lego world, carries real emotional weight, because the construction and deconstruction are not just aesthetic but thematic, because the show used its strangest formal experiment in these seasons not to be clever but to say something true. Season 25 also contains the episode called The Yellow Badge of Cowardice, and the episode called The War of Art, and the episode called What to Expect When Bart's Expecting. The strangest episode in the season alongside Brick Like Me is probably the fourth episode, which aired on October 6, 2013. It is called Gone Abe Gone. The episode is an investigation story. Homer tries to find out what happened to his father Abe before Abe died. He follows a series of clues that lead him through the history of Grandpa's life, through experiences and choices that Grandpa made decades before Homer was born, through a version of Abe Simpson that is not the comic figure the show usually gives us, but someone younger and more uncertain and more capable of both love and cowardice than the Grandpa of the present tense suggests. The episode does not resolve into a simple redemption narrative. What Homer discovers about his father is complicated. The choices Abe made had consequences for people other than Abe. His capacity for love and his capacity for emotional avoidance were related parts of the same personality. He is, a person shaped by circumstances and choices made across decades, and the shape he ended up in is not simply good or bad, but simply human, which is sometimes the hardest thing to say. This is strange because the show is willing to let the investigation conclude without exonerating its subject. Homer goes looking for his father's history and finds something true rather than something comforting, and the episode does not apologize for the truth it finds. Season 26 contains the episode called Simpsorama, which is a crossover with Futurama, the show created by Simpsons alumnus Matt Groening. The crossover is funny and nostalgic and technically accomplished, but it is not the strangest episode of the season. The strangest episode of season 26 is the ninth episode, which aired on December 7th, 2014. It is called I Won't Be Home for Christmas. Homer misses Christmas dinner because he falls asleep at Moe's Tavern and wakes up to discover that his family has gone home without him. He tries to walk home through a Springfield that is, in the middle of the night on Christmas Eve, transformed by snow and silence into something that does not quite resemble the Springfield of ordinary episodes. The episode is quiet. It is one of the quietest episodes the show has ever produced. Homer walks through the empty, snowy streets alone, and the silence of the Springfield around him is not played for comedy but for a kind of gentle melancholy that the show rarely attempts without immediately lightening it. He encounters other people who are alone on Christmas Eve. He encounters a version of Springfield that exists at the edges of the holiday, the people for whom the season is not warmth and gathering but exactly the opposite, the sharpest possible reminder of what they do not have. The show handles these encounters with care, not making them funny, not making them tragic, just allowing them to be what they are. Small encounters between people who are all, in their different ways, outside the celebration. Homer returns home. The family is waiting. The reunion is simple and true. The episode does not add anything to it, does not make the simplicity ironic. Homer is home. That is enough. This is the strangest episode of season 26 because it does so little and does it so carefully. The show, by its 26th season, had an enormous formal vocabulary, an enormous range of things it could do to generate comedy and emotion and surrealism and social commentary. I Won't Be Home for Christmas chooses not to use most of that vocabulary. It walks quietly through the snow and lets the quiet be the point. Season 27 contains the episode called Q Detective and the episode called Puffless, in which Patty and Selma try to quit smoking. This episode is strange because it takes Patty and Selma's smoking, which has been a comic constant of the show for over 2 decades, and treats it as a genuine addiction with genuine consequences. The humor is still present, but it is accompanied by an honesty about what addiction is and what it takes from the people who have it that the show had not previously attempted with these characters. Season 28 contains the episode called There Will Be Buds, in which Homer coaches a youth lacrosse team and befriends Milhouse's father, Kirk Van Houten. The friendship between Homer and Kirk is played with a warmth that the show does not usually extend to Kirk, who is more commonly a figure of comedy than a person the show takes seriously. The episode treats his loneliness, his longing for genuine male friendship, with a directness that is less typical of the show's standard handling of male emotion. The strangest episode of season 27 is the episode called Barthood, which aired on December 6, 2015. It is the show's explicit homage to the film Boyhood, the Richard Linklater movie that filmed its actors over 12 years to show the actual physical experience of aging. Barthood uses the conceit to show Bart's life from childhood to adulthood, moving through the various ages of his life with the slightly awkward jump-cut rhythm of the Linklater film. The episode is strange because it does what the show's floating timeline absolutely does not allow. It shows Bart growing up, Bart at different ages, Bart as a teenager and a young adult and eventually a fully grown man, is something the show has imagined in flash-forward episodes and future visions, but Barthood does it with a specificity and a continuity that the flash-forwards did not have. It commits to the aging in the way the film it is parodying commits to it, not as a joke or a glimpse, but as the episode's central experience. The episode is genuinely affecting in places, particularly in the sequences involving Bart and Lisa's evolving relationship across the years. The dynamic between them, the way an older sister and a younger brother navigate each other across the distance of their different trajectories, is rendered with more precision than the standard Bart and Lisa dynamic usually permits. The aging gives them room to move, to become something to each other that the frozen timeline never allows them to become. At the end of the episode, the adult Bart stands in the middle of Springfield, and the town resolves back into its present tense state around him. The aging is undone. The floating timeline reasserts itself. Bart is 10 again, but you have seen what he could have been. And the show, by showing you that, has done something it does not often do. It has admitted that the choice to freeze its characters in time is a choice, not a condition. It has acknowledged that time could pass if the show permitted it, and it has looked at what that passing would produce, and found it worth knowing about. and then return to the loop anyway. That is the most complex thing any episode in this stretch does. It acknowledges its own terms and chooses them again, with more consciousness than before. And there is something in that choice that is strange and honest and almost sad. An animated family on a street in a fictional town choosing to stay young forever because the alternative is growing up, and growing up means eventually it all ends. We are in the final stretch of our journey through Springfield tonight. We have come a long way. From the first season's lamplight and saxophone music, to the Golden Age's multi-layered comedy, to the experimental middle seasons, to the quietly excellent later years. We are now in the most recent chapter of the show, the final 8 seasons of our survey, the years from 2017 through 2025. These seasons occupy a peculiar position in the show's history. They are contemporary. They are still being made. The conversations about them are happening in real time, rather than retrospectively, which means the critical consensus has not yet settled. The nostalgic warmth has not yet accumulated. And the strange and good things these seasons contain are still being measured against live expectations, rather than historical ones. But strange and good things they contain. And on a night like tonight, when we are moving slowly through the longest and strangest animated show in American history, they deserve the same attention and the same careful, slow look that we have been giving to the seasons that came before. The strangest episode of Season 29 is the first episode of the season, which aired on October 1st, 2017. It is called The Summer of 4'2". Wait, that is from an earlier season. Let me take us to the right place. The strangest episode of Season 29 is the 19th episode, which aired on April 22nd, 2018. It is called Left Behind. Homer loses his job at the nuclear power plant. Not temporarily, not as a comedic complication that will be resolved within the episode, but genuinely and with consequences. He has to find new work. He applies for jobs. He goes through the process that people who lose jobs go through, the bureaucratic indignities, and the gradual erosion of professional identity, and the particular anxiety of not being sure what comes next. The episode is strange because it does not resolve into Homer getting his job back through a series of comic misadventures. It actually stays with the experience of job loss, with what it does to a person's sense of themselves, with how much of Homer's identity has been tied to the job he has been performing catastrophically for 30 years. Without the job, without the Sector 7G console and the donut and the afternoon nap and the daily failure to cause a meltdown, Homer is uncertain who he is. This is strange territory for the show to occupy without a comedy safety net. And the episode does not always succeed in maintaining the balance between honest difficulty and entertainment. But what it is attempting is more interesting than most of what a Season 29 episode of The Simpsons was expected to attempt. Season 29 also contains the episode called Gone Boy, which is a Sideshow Bob episode, and the episode called The Cad and the Hat, which is about a baseball cap and the strange power that objects can accumulate when they become symbols of relationship. Homer loses a beloved baseball cap, and the episode tracks, with unusual seriousness, what the loss of the object means to him and what it reveals about what the object was standing in for. Objects carry weight in The Simpsons. The show has always been good at this, at using particular items, Homer's lucky can of beer, Marge's beehive hairdo, Bart's skateboard, Lisa's saxophone, as condensed symbols of character identity. The Cat in the Hat is an episode that makes the symbolic weight of objects its explicit subject, and what it finds there is the familiar thing the show has always found, that the things we care about are containers for the feelings we cannot always access directly. Season 30 contains the episode called My Way or the Highway to Heaven, and the episode called I'm Just a Girl Who Can't Say Dio. The strangest episode of Season 30 is the 5th episode, which aired on November 4th, 2018. It is called Baby You Can't Drive My Car. The episode imagines Springfield as a testing ground for self-driving cars. The comic premise is good, and the episode gets considerable mileage from it, but what is strange about it is the way it uses the self-driving car technology as a lens for examining Homer's relationship to control, specifically his need to be the one operating whatever vehicle his life is currently in. Homer in a car that drives itself is Homer without the illusion of agency. The car goes where it goes. Homer cannot affect the outcome through his choices or his mistakes. He is a passenger in a vehicle that has, in his terms, removed him from the equation. And this removal, which should feel like relief to a man who has caused as many vehicular incidents as Homer has, actually produces in him a crisis. The self-driving car makes explicit something that was implicit in many of Homer's stories across 30 seasons, that Homer needs to believe he is doing something, that the appearance of agency is as important to him as actual agency, that being the one at the wheel matters even when he is driving into a ditch. The season also contains the episode called Bart vs. Itchy and Scratchy, which is about a rebooted version of the show, within the show that makes Itchy and Scratchy female. The episode is an extended parody of the debates around representation and rebooting and fan reception, and it is strange because it is willing to parody both sides of the debate, which made it uncomfortable for audiences who wanted the show to take a clear position and found its refusal to do so unsatisfying. The refusal to take a clear position is itself the position, if you are willing to accept that as an answer. The show is examining a cultural argument about media and identity and fan expectation, and its examination does not deliver a verdict. It delivers an observation that these arguments are real and that both sides have genuine concerns, and that media culture has a capacity to generate passionate disagreement about questions that are genuinely worth disagreeing about. This is not a satisfying conclusion. It is an honest one. Season 31 contains the episode called Go Big or Go Homer, and the episode called The Winter of Our Monetized Content. The strangest episode of Season 31 is the 19th episode, which aired on April 19, 2020. It is called War and Priests. This episode aired during the early weeks of the pandemic lockdown, and it contains a joke that turned out to be relevant to the moment in ways the writers could not have anticipated. There is a moment involving Itchy and Scratchy where they predict an outcome that matched something happening in the real world at the time of broadcast, and the timing produced the particular strange sensation that the show's predictions sometimes generate, the feeling that the cartoon knows something it should not. The episode itself is about Springfield's church receiving a new, young, progressive minister whose style conflicts with the community's expectations of what their religious leadership should look like. This is familiar satire, but the episode handles the conflict with more ambivalence than the standard handling would suggest. The progressive minister is not simply right and the resistant congregation simply wrong. The show takes seriously the community's attachment to the familiar forms of their worship, the specific rituals and rhythms that have organized their experience of faith across years. Change, even change that might be improvements in the abstract, disrupts the texture of a lived experience in ways that are real costs and not simply failures of imagination. The episode is also, in the context of its broadcast date, about community and the experience of being separated from the rituals that connect people to each other. It aired when communities across the world were separated from their physical gathering places, when the rituals of church and workplace and social life had been disrupted by a health crisis that the episode predates, but that was very present in the minds of its first audience. Season 32 contains the episode called 3 Dreams Denied, which is about unrealized ambitions and the specific sadness of the life you did not have. And it contains the episode called The Road to Cincinnati, which sends Homer and Superintendent Chalmers on a journey together, and which is strange because it treats a character who has always been peripheral as someone with an inner life worth exploring. Chalmers and Homer alone in a car for 22 minutes is a premise that reveals something about both characters that neither of their standard contexts permits. Chalmers without Skinner to frustrate him is a different kind of person. Homer without his family to frustrate is a different kind of person. The episode discovers that these two different people, stripped of their context, actually have something to say to each other. This is one of the quieter pleasures of the later seasons. The show taking characters who have been defined by their relationships to the main family for 30-plus years and putting them in situations where those defining relationships are absent, where they have to be something else, where the show has to discover what they actually contain. Season 33 contains the episode called Mothers and Other Strangers, which is one of the most formally elegant episodes about memory and grief the show has produced. The episode concerns the anniversary of Marge's mother's death, and Marge's attempt to process the grief through looking at photographs and telling stories about the past. The flashback structure is familiar, but what the episode does within it is unusual. The episode allows the past to be genuinely past, not reshaped by the present's understanding of it, not rendered in the warm amber of nostalgia. The past in this episode has the specific quality of something partially forgotten and partially remembered, where the memories are true but incomplete, where the full person is not available, where what you are left with is fragments and impressions rather than a continuous record. Marge's mother, Jacqueline Bouvier, has always been a peripheral character in the show. She appears when the plot requires her and recedes when it does not. Mothers and Other Strangers gives her more interior texture in 22 minutes than she has received in her previous appearances, and it does this through Marge's grief, through the way that death creates the need to reconstruct the person who is gone, to find them in the fragments that remain. The episode is strange because it is genuinely sad. Not comedically sad, not the kind of sad that the show uses as setup for a joke that will lighten it. Just sad, in the way that grief is sad, in the way that missing someone who is gone is sad, without qualification. Season 34 contains the episode called A Serious Flanders, which imagines Ned Flanders in the context of a gritty crime drama, a Breaking Bad meets True Detective reimagining of the Springfield neighborhood that plays with sustained seriousness and genuine style. The episode is a parody, but the parody involves producing something that resembles the genre it is parodying closely enough that the relationship between it and its subject becomes interestingly complicated. The Ned of this episode is not the comedic Ned. He is a Ned rendered in the visual language of prestige drama, in cool blues and dramatic shadows and slow, deliberate pacing. He is still himself, still recognizably Ned, but the genre has changed what is visible about him. The prestige drama aesthetic surfaces the darkness that the show has always said was there beneath the cheerfulness, the suppressed rage and the conditioned compliance, and the grief that Ned has not been permitted to fully feel. In this context, those qualities look like what they would look like in an actual crime drama. Significant, dangerous, worth watching. The episode does not commit to the drama register completely, does not forget that it is a comedy, but it holds the balance more carefully than most parody episodes do, staying in the crime drama territory long enough that the questions the genre asks about Ned's character are genuinely asked, not just gestured at. Season 35 contains the episode called McMansion and Wife, and the episode called Clown V, Board of Education, and the episode called The Incredible Lightness of Being a Baby. The strangest episode of Season 35 is the 6th episode, which aired on November 5, 2023. It is called Iron Marge. Marge decides to become a superhero. The episode is about the appeal of a life in which your capacity to protect the people you love is externalized, made physical, given a costume and a name. Marge, who has spent 35 seasons protecting her family through patience and emotional labor and the invisible work of holding everything together, imagines a version of that protection that is visible and acknowledged and celebrated. The episode is strange because of what it reveals about why the superhero fantasy is specifically appealing to Marge. The things she protects her family from in the real life of the episode are diffuse and undramatic. Homer's catastrophes are not addressed by punching. The pressures on Lisa and Bart are not resolved by physical intervention. The emotional labor that constitutes Marge's daily life cannot be dramatized as heroism because it does not have the narrative shape of heroism. It is continuous and unremarkable and essential and almost entirely unacknowledged. The superhero version of Marge is powerful and celebrated and has a fan following. She does things that can be seen and appreciated and applauded. This is, the episode quietly observes, almost exactly unlike what Marge actually does, which is real and essential and invisible. The episode does not resolve this tension entirely. It acknowledges it and then lets Marge return to her actual life, the life without a costume, the life of continuous invisible labor, not as a defeat but as a choice. She does the harder thing and the more important thing, and she does it without the cape. Season 36, the most recent season, continues the show's exploration of its own aging, its own relationship to the history it has accumulated, its own awareness of being a thing that has existed longer than most of the institutions around it. The season contains an episode called Homer's Crossing that is about Homer's relationship to the concept of legacy, specifically what it means to have done the same job badly for 36 years, and what kind of mark, if any, that makes on the world. The episode is not resolved into easy comfort. It does not tell Homer that his incompetence is secretly a form of excellence, or that the plant has secretly been improved by his presence. It allows the ambiguity of his legacy to remain ambiguous. This is the thing the late seasons of The Simpsons do that the early seasons could not have done. The early seasons did not have enough history to look back on. The late seasons have an enormous amount of history, a weight of accumulated story and character and event that the show cannot ignore even when it tries to. Homer's Crossing looks back at 36 years of Homer Simpson and asks what it adds up to, and the answer is not simple, and the episode does not pretend it is. What it adds up to is this: a man who loved his family with a totality that exceeded his understanding of how to express that love, who failed repeatedly at almost everything the world considers worth succeeding at, and who nevertheless produced in the people around him something that is harder to name than success, a feeling of being loved imperfectly and completely, of being known and valued in spite of or because of the knowing. That is the central mystery of Homer Simpson. Not the radiation theory, not the coma theory, not any of the elaborate structures we can build to explain why he is the way he is. The central mystery is simpler and more durable than any theory. How does someone so limited produce so much love? And how does that love sustain people across 36 years of watching it, fail to manifest as anything the world recognizes as mattering? We have been in Springfield for a long time tonight. We have moved through 36 seasons, through the strange corners of every era, through the dreams and the theories and the emotional truths that live underneath the jokes, through the hidden rooms and the jazz music in the clouds and the Lego bricks, and the contracts of silence and the statues without heads, and the dogs who would not run into the fire, and the men who chose stupidity because the alternative was too clear. Every episode we visited tonight was strange in its own way, and every episode was, underneath its strangeness, about the same things, about love and family and what it means to belong to people who are imperfect in ways that are sometimes funny and sometimes genuinely hard to bear, about what time does to relationships and what relationships do to time, about the way that a community can hold stories that are both true and false simultaneously, that can believe the lie and the truth at once because both are necessary to the community's survival. Springfield is a strange place. You know this. You have always known this if you have watched the show long enough. But the strangeness is not incidental to what the show is. It is what the show is. The strangeness is how the show tells the truth, because some truths are too large or too fragile to tell directly. You have to approach them sideways, through a three-eyed fish, through a baby with a pacifier who is waiting for the right moment, through an old man whose face appears in clouds above a town that has not aged in 36 years. You approach them at night, slowly, the way we have been approaching them tonight. You let your mind go soft and your thoughts go loose, and you allow the images to arrive and drift and settle without requiring them to mean anything specific. The lamplight on the Springfield street, the nuclear plant glowing on the hill, Homer at his console, asleep again, the reactor humming its patient hum, Lisa at her window with her saxophone, Bart on his skateboard, going somewhere, going nowhere, going wherever the momentum of being 10 years old forever takes you, Marge in the kitchen, hands steady, face calm, holding everything together in her invisible and essential way, Maggie in her crib, watching, always watching, behind those enormous eyes, something patient and extraordinary, waiting for the moment to arrive, waiting for the right time, saying nothing, which has always been the smartest thing anyone in that family ever did. Springfield is still out there. It will be out there when you wake up. It will be out there tomorrow and the day after and the year after and the decade after, frozen in its impossible present, the children never aging, the beer always cold, the credits always rolling, the couch gag always playing, the town always impossible and familiar and yours. Go to sleep now. Let Springfield dream around you. The plant is running, the streets are quiet, the stars above the cracked cooling towers are doing what stars do, burning slow and patient, indifferent to the town below them, and yet somehow, in the logic of this strange and particular universe, part of it, part of Springfield, part of the dream. Homer is home. That is enough. That has always been enough. There is a reason the first season of The Simpsons has a quality of raw exposure that the later seasons, polished and confident and self-aware, do not replicate. The show in its first 9 episodes had not yet developed the protective layer of irony that would become, in later years, its primary mode of self-presentation. The jokes came without winking. The emotion came without apologizing for itself. When the show was sad in season 1, it was sad plainly, the way a child is sad, without the adult reflex of undercutting the feeling before anyone can use it against you. This is why the first season's strangest episodes have a quality of nearness that the more accomplished later seasons sometimes lack. They are not better, they are not more sophisticated, but they are close to something, close in the way that early attempts at anything are close to their own motivation, before craft accumulates enough to place distance between the making and the made. The show would spend the next 3 decades developing the sophisticated machinery of comedy and pathos and social satire. But before it had that machinery, in those first 9 episodes, it was doing something simpler, and in its simplicity, something that remained strange even after everything that followed. It was a show about a family trying to love each other well, failing regularly, trying again, and finding that the effort itself, imperfect and ongoing and without guaranteed outcome, was the thing the show wanted to be about. This is an ordinary thing to be about. Most family comedies claim to be about it. What made The Simpsons strange is that it meant it in a way that the show's subsequent 35 years of evidence confirms. The love at the center of the show has never been ironic. The irony is everywhere around it, in the jokes about Springfield's dysfunction and the satire of American culture and the absurdism of the plots. But the love itself, the specific and imperfect love of the Simpson family, has always been stated plainly, as a fact, as the thing around which everything else is organized. That plainness is the strangest thing the show has ever done. In a medium and a culture that treats sincerity as a kind of naivety, that uses irony as the primary mode of intelligent engagement with the world, The Simpsons made its family's love unironic and sustained that choice for 36 years, and nothing about that choice became easier or more fashionable over time. It just continued to be true, which in the long run may be the most radical thing the show ever did. Season 1 of The Simpsons is also the season that introduced a detail that would become one of the show's most quietly important visual choices: the color of Springfield's residents, the yellow skin. The specific shade that covers every Springfield native, that marks them as members of a community that does not exist in any fixed location but that exists, unmistakably and immediately, whenever that shade of yellow appears. The color was chosen for practical reasons initially. It was meant to draw the viewer's attention, to pop off the television screen, to signal that this was not a realistic depiction of human beings, but something slightly different, something in the register of the fantastic rather than the documentary. The yellow was the show saying, "We are not pretending to be the real world, we are something else." But over 36 years, the yellow has accumulated meaning that goes beyond its original practical function. The yellow is Springfield. The yellow is the family. The yellow is the mark of belonging to a community that has been contaminated and mutated and shaped by forces its residents do not understand and cannot resist. Or, in the context of the coma theory, the yellow is the color of dream logic, the color that dreams paint human beings when they do not have access to the full reference material of reality. Or the yellow is simply the color of The Simpsons, and The Simpsons are the color yellow, and after 36 years, the two things have become so thoroughly identified with each other that separating them is no longer possible, any more than you could separate the Atlantic from its salt. The specific warm yellow of a family that chose to be honest about loving each other in a medium that usually finds honesty embarrassing. The yellow of Springfield in its morning light, the cracked cooling tower and the elementary school and the convenience store and the church and Moe's Tavern, all the same strange warm color, all part of the same impossible town that cannot be located on any map, but that everyone who has ever watched the show can find immediately inside themselves. What you notice, spending time in seasons 2 and 3 of The Simpsons, is how consistently the show was willing to let its characters occupy spaces of genuine uncertainty. Not the uncertainty of a cliffhanger, not the manufactured tension of a plot that will resolve before the end credits, but the real uncertainty of people in the middle of a situation whose outcome is not yet known and whose meaning depends on what they do with it. Homer's Odyssey, the 3rd episode of Season 1 but relevant here in terms of tone, is an episode in which Homer tries to throw himself off a cliff. He has lost his job, he has decided he is a burden to his family, and he goes to a cliff above Springfield with the intention of ending his life. He is stopped by a banner his family has made reading, "We love you, Homer," which they release from a car as they drive past. The episode treats this moment with complete sincerity. There is no punchline. There is no winking at the absurdity of a suicide prevention scene in a primetime cartoon. The family loves Homer. They do not want him to die. And the banner is the right and true expression of that love, and it works. This is the show in its early seasons being willing to go to genuinely dark places without comedy as a safety net. The darkness is there, plainly, and then the love is there, plainly, and the two things exist in the same moment without the show requiring either of them to yield to the other. Season 2 built on this willingness. The episode called Principal Charming introduces Selma's loneliness, her desire for romantic partnership, in a way that treats the loneliness as real rather than comic. Selma wants to fall in love. She wants to be chosen. She is not young and she is not conventionally attractive by the show's own terms, and the episode does not pretend these things do not matter in the world it depicts. They matter. And underneath the comedy of the mistaken romantic plot, underneath the jokes about Bart trying to matchmake his aunt, there is Selma's actual longing, which is dignified and real and ultimately unmet by the episode's resolution. The show in these early seasons was practicing a kind of emotional honesty about its secondary characters that it would not always maintain as it expanded, and the cast grew, and the secondary characters accumulated their own comedic identities. Selma became a comic figure, primarily, but in Season 2 she was briefly something else, a person whose disappointments were as real as anyone's. Season 3 continued this pattern with the episode called Lisa's Pony, which is about Homer buying Lisa a pony she has always wanted, and then spending every night working a second job at the Quick E-Mart to pay for it. The episode is structured as a comedy about Homer's incompetence and his late conversion to responsible parenting. But what it actually does, in the long sequence of Homer working the night shift and then coming home in the early morning light to spend a few minutes with Lisa before she goes to school, is something genuinely moving about the length of time over which love is expressed. Love in these moments is not dramatic. It is not a grand gesture. It is Homer at 4 in the morning, exhausted beyond coherence, making sure his daughter sees him before she starts her day, because the pony matters to her and therefore he will make the pony possible, even if it requires him to sacrifice something significant. The sacrifice is not heroic in any visible way. Nobody sees it. Nobody thanks him for it. The show does not frame it as heroism. It frames it as what you do when you love someone and you have made a mistake and you want to fix it and the fix turns out to cost more than you expected. That is one of the oldest and truest things the show has ever said about the specific love of a parent for a child. Not that it is unconditional, not that it is perfect, but that it shows up at 4 in the morning and does the thing that needs doing, because the alternative is the child going without something that matters to her, and that the parent who made the mistake cannot bear to be the reason for her going without. There is nothing strange about this, which is what makes it one of the stranger things the show does. In a medium that tends to aestheticize parental love into something clean and beautiful and free of the texture of actual effort, The Simpsons, in its early seasons, kept showing it in its actual form, as exhausted and imperfect and continuous as the thing that Homer does at 4 in the morning when there is no audience and no applause and no narrative payoff, just the work and the love that makes the work necessary. The golden age of The Simpsons is full of episodes that have been analyzed and celebrated and quoted until their individual moments have been abstracted from their context and turned into cultural currency. The specific quote, the specific GIF, the specific scene that has been shared so many times that the original episode has become almost beside the point. What gets lost in this process, what the cultural currency version of the golden age obscures, is the shape of the episodes as whole things. The way they move, the pace at which they allow themselves to develop, the spaces of quiet that they permit between the jokes, the moments where the show stops generating laughs for long enough to let something else happen. Season 4's Marge vs. the Monorail is the episode most consistently cited as a golden age peak. It has the Lyle Lanley character and the musical number and the climax that riffs on a famous scene from a famous film. All of these things are funny, and the episode is brilliant comedy by any standard. But what is strange about Marge vs. the Monorail in the context of a slow evening watching the show for its strangeness is how briefly and precisely it touches on something that is not comedy at all. Marge, who is skeptical of the monorail scheme from the beginning, does her own investigation. She goes to a town called North Haverbrook that had a Lyle Lanley monorail built years earlier. What she finds there is a ghost town, a community that invested its resources in a faulty scheme and was left with nothing when the scheme failed. The people she encounters are survivors of a civic disaster, people whose town was bankrupted by a con man and who are still living in the aftermath. This is played briefly and then returned to the comedy, but the image of North Haverbrook, depopulated and ruined, is not a joke. It is a warning the episode includes and then moves past, trusting the audience to hold it alongside the comedy that surrounds it. North Haverbrook is what happens when the town does not have Marge to look at what is actually happening. Springfield is saved because one person paid attention and refused to be swept along by the energy of collective enthusiasm. That one person being Marge is not accidental. Marge is always the one paying attention. Marge is always the one who sees what is actually happening beneath the surface of what is being performed. The show gives her this role consistently, the role of the person who is not taken in, who holds the skepticism that the others cannot sustain because they are too busy being entertained. And then it shows you, in North Haverbrook, what a Springfield without Marge would look like. Not destroyed by radiation or sealed under a dome. Simply gone bankrupt because nobody paid attention and the con man took everything. Season 5's Homer and Apu is another episode that deserves more attention in the context of what the show was attempting rather than what it is remembered for. The episode is about Apu Nahasapi Mapetalon losing his job at the Quickie Mart after Homer exposes his practice of selling expired products. Apu, who has worked at the Quickie Mart for so long that the store and his identity have become inseparable, has to figure out who he is without the job that has defined him. The episode does not answer this question directly. It goes on a detour to the Quickie Mart's corporate headquarters, a detour that is played for absurdism and comedy. But the question it asks, the question of identity and work and what happens to a person when the work that has organized their life is removed, is a real question. And Apu's experience of asking it is specific to his character in ways that the show honors. Apu has a complicated relationship to America and to Springfield and to the Quickie Mart specifically. He is educated well beyond the requirements of his job. He is intelligent and articulate and capable of far more than selling slushies at 2 in the morning. The job has been, simultaneously, a compromise and a genuine vocation, something he has committed to with full sincerity even knowing that it was not the life his education was supposed to lead to. Losing it is not simply losing a paycheck. It is losing the compromise that he had made peace with, losing the particular shape of a life he had organized around something specific. The episode does not hold this long. It returns to comedy because it is a comedy and that is what it does. But in the moment where Apu's loss is visible, the show is honest about what the loss means, and the honesty is strange and good. The Golden Age seasons 6 and 7 also contain the show's most complex treatment of celebrity and fame, specifically in the episode called Homer's Triple Bypass from season 4, and more directly in season 6's Sideshow Bob Roberts. Sideshow Bob Roberts is an episode about political manipulation and media that has become more relevant with each passing year since it aired in October of 1994. Sideshow Bob, running for mayor of Springfield on a conservative platform, wins the election through fraudulent absentee ballots. The fraud is extensive and elaborate and ultimately exposed through the investigative work of Bart and Lisa, who make for an unlikely but effective journalistic team. The strange part of this episode is not the fraud but the reaction to the fraud. When Bart and Lisa expose what happened, when the evidence of the manipulation is made clear, the response from the community is not uniform outrage. There are Springfield residents who are not particularly troubled by the fraud because they preferred the candidate who benefited from it. The outcome from their perspective is acceptable, which makes the process a secondary concern. This is deeply uncomfortable and deeply accurate. The episode aired in 1994, well before the specific political environment of the 2010s and 20s that makes its observations feel prescient. The show was not predicting anything specific. It was observing something that has always been true about democratic systems. That process only has value to the people whose preferred outcomes the process threatens. When the outcome is what you wanted, the process that produced it is something you are willing to be flexible about. The episode does not take a comfortable position on this. It does not deliver a clean civics lesson. It depicts the fraudulent election, exposes it through the children's investigation, and then shows you a community that is divided and somewhat cynical about what the exposure means. The bad actor is removed. The election is overturned. But the appetite that made the fraud possible, the willingness of some part of the community to prefer the candidate over the principle, remains. Season 7 deepens this territory in the episode called Much Apu About Nothing, in which a series of events lead Springfield to vote on a proposition that would deport all undocumented immigrants. The proposition passes. The episode does not conclude the political debate it raises. It concludes with Apu passing his citizenship exam and becoming an American citizen, which is played as triumph, but it does not conclude with the political environment that produced the proposition changing, or with the community becoming more or less tolerant than it was before. The show in these seasons was doing something that television comedy rarely attempts with sustained seriousness, engaging with political and social questions in ways that do not deliver the audience to a comfortable resolution. Not because the show did not have values, it clearly did, but because it understood that the questions it was raising were not resolved by the end of a 22-minute episode, that the community it was depicting was genuinely divided in ways that comedy alone could not heal, and that pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. This is one of the stranger things about the Golden Age, in retrospect. At the moment when the show was being celebrated most loudly for its comedy and its craft, it was also being quietly honest about the limits of what a sitcom can do with serious subjects, about the gap between acknowledging a problem and solving it, about the kind of change that is visible within the length of an episode, and the kind that happens only over much longer periods and much harder processes. Sleep in the strangest parts of the Golden Age, the monorail ghost town, the community that would rather prefer its candidate than its process, the immigrant who passes his citizenship exam while the environment that threatened him remains what it was. The show at its peak, being honest about things that went beyond what peaks are usually asked to contain. Season 8 also contains what many fans consider the show's most emotionally devastating non-Treehouse of Horror episode. It is the fourth episode of Season 8, which aired on October 27, 1996. It is called Burns, Baby Burns. This is not the most devastating episode. The most devastating episode of Season 8, in terms of its emotional impact on a first-time viewer, is the episode called You Only Move Twice, which aired on November 3, 1996. The family moves to a new town called Cypress Creek because Homer has been recruited by a visionary and charismatic employer named Hank Scorpio. The episode is structured as what appears to be a story about the Simpsons finding their perfect life elsewhere, outside Springfield, in a community that is newer and cleaner and better funded and managed by someone who is, unlike Burns, genuinely supportive of Homer and appreciative of his effort. The joke, which the episode builds slowly and reveals gradually, is that Hank Scorpio is a James Bond villain. He is in the process of holding the world hostage. The workers at Cypress Creek are the employees of a terrorist organization, and Homer's job, which he performs with more genuine competence than he ever shows at the nuclear plant, is a direct operational role in Scorpio's scheme of global domination. Homer does not know this. By the time he finds out, the episode has let you spend enough time in Cypress Creek to understand why he did not want to know. Cypress Creek is better than Springfield in every quantifiable way. The town is clean. The corporation actually cares about its employees. Homer's boss is enthusiastic and supportive and remembers Homer's name without being prompted. The house is bigger. The schools are better. Bart and Lisa are both, in different ways, finding that the new environment is not working for them. But the new environment is objectively superior to what they left. And yet the episode ends with the family returning to Springfield. Their particular and imperfect and irreplaceable Springfield. The Springfield that Burns runs with negligence and cruelty. The Springfield that is impossible and contaminated, and where nobody knows Homer's name, and where the house is cramped and the schools are inadequate. They go back because this is home, not because it is better. Not because Cypress Creek was shown to be secretly inferior. Because home is home, which is to say that the place you belong is not the place that is objectively best for you, but the place that has been shaped by your presence into something that fits the particular irregular shape of who you are. Even if that irregular shape includes all of your worst habits and failures. This is genuinely strange as an ending to what might have been a simple satirical episode about villain organizations and corporate culture. The show could have used the Scorpio reveal to send the family home triumphant, to make Cypress Creek the villain rather than just the boss. But the episode does not do that. Scorpio is, in his own terms, quite nice. The family's decision to leave is not based on Scorpio being bad. It is based on Springfield being theirs. That is a complicated and honest thing to say about the experience of belonging somewhere. You do not always belong to the best place. You belong to your place, which is different. And the difference between the two is sometimes everything. The television landscape into which seasons 10 and 11 of The Simpsons arrived was itself becoming stranger and more complicated. Reality television was beginning its transformation of the medium. The internet was starting to create the first generation of audience members who could discuss the show in real time with other viewers across geographic distances. The cultural conversation around The Simpsons was expanding from the family living room to something larger and more distributed. The show's response to this expanding context was not always graceful, but it was more aware than critics gave it credit for. The episode called Homer to the Max, from season 10, is about Homer discovering that a cool new television character shares his name, and then that character being rewritten as an incompetent buffoon, which causes Homer real social damage because people identify him with the character. He eventually takes legal action to change his name. This is a remarkably self-aware episode for season 10. The show is explicitly examining the way that fictional representations shape public perception, the way that a name or an image in popular culture can attach to a real person and alter how that person is perceived. Homer's experience with the Max Simpson character is a satire of The Simpsons' own cultural status, of the way that the show had itself created a particular Homer Simpson who existed in the public imagination and whose characteristics attached to things and people and ideas that shared his name. The episode is strange because it is the show looking at itself from the outside, seeing its own Homer as a cultural artifact with consequences for the idea of what Homer means, and then dramatizing that examination through a plot that is simultaneously very funny and genuinely disorienting. You are watching Homer Simpson deal with the consequences of being Homer Simpson, and the recursiveness of that experience is the episode's real subject, even when the plot is treating it as a comedy of name confusion. Season 11's episode Alone Again, Natura Diddley is the episode in which Maud Flanders is killed by a t-shirt cannon. The death is random and quick, and is presented without the narrative weight that a character death of this significance would normally receive. Maud Flanders has been Ned's wife for 11 seasons. She has been background, primarily, a cheerful presence without strong characterization, but a presence. She is gone in a moment. What the episode then does is extraordinary. Rather than allowing Maud's death to be a plot mechanism, rather than using it purely as an opportunity to examine Ned's grief and then resolve the grief in the course of the episode, the show stays in the grief. Ned is not okay by the end. The grief does not resolve. He dates someone briefly, and the dating is clearly premature and wrong, and the episode knows it is clearly premature and wrong, and shows that knowledge in Ned's behavior, and in the behavior of the woman he dates, and in the awkwardness of every interaction. The episode is strange because it allows the grief to be what grief actually is, an ongoing condition rather than a problem to be solved within 22 minutes. The show cannot sustain this indefinitely, because the show is a sitcom and Ned's ongoing grief would require ongoing episodes of grief, which is not the form. But for the length of this one episode, it permits the weight of loss to be what it is, without the comedy resolving it, without the family rallying to make it better, without a lesson or a turnaround. Ned Flanders at the end of Alone Again, Natura Diddley is a man who has lost his wife and does not know what comes next. That is all. The credits roll on that not knowing, and the episode ends there, and Ned's grief continues into whatever comes next, which the show will handle imperfectly because the show handles everything imperfectly, but which will be real because Maud's death was real, within the logic of this strange and particular world. The specific pleasure of watching The Simpsons in its middle seasons, the seasons that the critical consensus had declared the decline, is the pleasure of finding things you did not expect to find. The Golden Age trained its audience to expect a certain level of ambition, a certain density of craft, and when those qualities became less consistently available, the audience experienced the gap as failure. But the absence of those qualities did not mean the absence of all qualities. It meant the presence of different qualities, things that a show under less pressure, a show that no longer needed to prove itself, could afford to attempt. Season 13's episode Little Girl in the Big Ten is one of those things. Lisa passes a gymnastics course at Springfield University and ends up enrolled there, spending time with college students who treat her as an intellectual peer, which she is, while Bart has to pretend to be ill to prevent their parents from finding out. The episode is about the loneliness of being extremely intelligent in an environment that is not organized around your kind of intelligence, and about the specific strangeness of being a child in an adult environment, of having access to the conversation that your mind is ready for, while your body and your emotional development are still years behind. Lisa in college is uncomfortable. Not because the college students are cruel, but because Lisa, while intellectually peer-appropriate, is still 8 years old in every other dimension. She does not have their experiences. She does not have their relationships. She does not have their autonomy or their access or their history of making choices and living with the consequences. She has the mind without the life that usually grows up around such a mind. And the discrepancy is uncomfortable in the way that developmental asymmetry is always uncomfortable. The episode does not resolve this by sending Lisa back to elementary school with a lesson about belonging where you are. It resolves it the way most real situations of developmental asymmetry resolve: imperfectly, provisionally, with Lisa occupying multiple spaces simultaneously and belonging fully to none of them. Season 13 also contains the episode called Half-Decent Proposal, which brings back Artie Ziff in a context that is stranger and darker than his earlier appearances, and which asks whether Marge has ever wondered what her life would have looked like if she had stayed with her prom date instead of choosing Homer. The show depicts her wondering this without deciding, which is honest because of course she wonders. Anyone in a long relationship wonders. The wondering is not a failure of love. It is one of the natural products of having made an irreversible choice and being intelligent enough to imagine what the alternatives would have looked like. What the episode does not do is punish Marge for wondering. It does not stage a confrontation where Artie's awfulness is displayed to confirm that Marge made the right choice. The episode allows the wondering to exist without immediately resolving it into reassurance, and this is stranger and truer than the reassurance would have been. Season 15 contained one of the most formally unusual episodes the show produced in this era, and it receives almost no discussion in the show's critical literature. The episode is called Codependence Day, the 14th episode of the season, which aired on March 21, 2004. The plot involves Homer developing a crush on a new movie Marge has enjoyed, and Marge developing a wine habit. What makes the episode strange is not its plot but its specific handling of addiction and the way that loving someone can become its own kind of dependent relationship. Marge's wine consumption begins as a coping mechanism and becomes something more habitual, and the show takes this seriously in a way that is unusual. Not dramatically, not with the full weight of an after-school special about alcoholism, but with the quieter observation that Marge, who usually manages the household's dysfunction, has her own relationship to escape, her own need to step outside the constant demand of being the competent center of everything. Homer's discovery of Marge's wine habit and his response to it reveals something about how he has organized his sense of their relationship. He has built his stability around Marge's reliability. When Marge is unreliable, when she is the one who needs managing rather than the one who does the managing, Homer does not step into the managing role gracefully. He panics. Not because he does not love her, but because he has allowed his own stability to depend on her stability in a way that left no room for her to be unstable. The episode is strange because it is, underneath the comedy, a fairly serious examination of codependency in a long-term relationship, of the way that intimate arrangements can calcify into roles that leave both people less flexible than they should be, that prevent one person from being anything other than what the other person needs them to be. The Simpsons is not a marriage therapy text, but in this episode it is being honest about something that marriage therapy texts are written about, and the honesty is strange and good. The period between seasons 18 and 20 also contains what is arguably the best couch gag in the show's history, which is the couch gag in the season 20 episode called Gone Maggie Gone. The couch gag is a minute-long parody of the opening credits of The Dark Knight, replacing the Batman imagery with Springfield imagery, Gotham City's burning skyline replaced by the Springfield nuclear plant's glow, Batman's cowl replaced by Homer's face. It is specific and funny and technically accomplished and completely throwaway in the context of the episode, a 60-second bit of craft that most viewers would have registered as funny without registering exactly why it was funny. The why it was funny is that the couch gag was demonstrating that The Simpsons' visual language and the visual language of prestige cinema occupy adjacent spaces, that the graphic intensity of a Christopher Nolan blockbuster and the graphic simplicity of Springfield are not as far apart as they might seem, that the nuclear plant as Gothic architecture and Burns as villain and Homer as hero who is also buffoon are all already present in the show's own terms and need only the right formal framing to make them visible. This is something the show did occasionally in this period that deserves more credit than it usually receives. It demonstrated, briefly and without making a big deal of it, that the aesthetic vocabulary of Springfield was sophisticated enough to parody extremely different visual registers convincingly, that the show understood what it was doing well enough to do it in the grammar of something entirely unlike itself and have the result be recognizably Springfield. Season 19's episode called The Departed is another episode from this period that deserves attention in the context of what the show was attempting. The episode is a parody of The Departed and of the police procedural genre more broadly, with Bart at the center of a story about undercover infiltration of the Springfield elementary social hierarchy. The parody is good, the episode is funny, but what is strange about it is how genuinely it inhabits the paranoia of the genre it is parodying. The experience of not knowing who is trustworthy, of wondering whether the person you have confided in is actually working against you, of trying to maintain a deception while being unsure whether someone else is maintaining a counter-deception. These are feelings that The Departed generates in its audience, and that The Departed generates in a version appropriate to the Springfield context. This emotional translation, the conversion of adult paranoid thriller emotions into a form that works for a 10-year-old social world, is what the episode is really doing, and it does it with more precision than the standard parody episode attempted. The result is strange, because it is genuinely effective as a parody of paranoia, which means it is genuinely paranoid in miniature, which means the comedy does not entirely cancel the feeling, which means you are watching a cartoon about elementary school social dynamics and feeling, briefly and specifically, the particular dread of not knowing who knows what. Season 22's Flaming Moe is an episode that is strange in a way that has everything to do with who its central character actually is. The episode involves Moe converting his tavern into a gay bar called Flaming Moe's, and Moe discovering that he is, despite everything, an effective manager of the new establishment. He is liked. He is appreciated. The community that forms around the bar is warm and real, and Moe is, within it, more genuinely comfortable than he has been in any episode the show had previously produced about him. The episode does not address Moe's own sexuality directly. It is not that kind of episode. But what it does address, obliquely and with more care than usual, is Moe's fundamental loneliness and the specific experience of finding a community that wants you even when you are not sure why it wants you. Moe has been a fixture of Springfield for 22 seasons. He is the bartender whose tavern is Homer's second home, whose existence is organized around the needs of his customers, whose own desires and dreams have been the subject of occasional episodes but who remains, in most of his appearances, a vehicle for comic expression rather than a character whose inner life is consistently attended to. Flaming Moe's gives Moe a community that attends to him, and his response to being attended to is the episode's strange, warm center. He is liked not because he is likable in the conventional sense, not because he has qualities that the world typically recognizes as appealing, but because within this specific community he is valuable in ways that his previous context did not recognize. The episode is suggesting something that the show did not always take the time to suggest, that belonging is sometimes a matter of finding the context that makes your particular qualities intelligible as assets rather than deficits. This is a generous idea, and the show delivers it with a generosity toward Moe that is not its standard register. Moe is usually funny in the way that inadequacy is funny, in the way that longing without prospect is funny. In Flaming Moe's, the longing finds a temporary prospect, and the show is happy for him, and the happiness is not undercut. What makes Brick Like Me the strangest episode of its era is not just the formal achievement of the Lego animation, but the emotional logic that makes the formal achievement meaningful. The Lego world is not arbitrary. It is the show's most explicit visualization of a feeling that has always been implicit in the show's treatment of Homer. The feeling that the life we inhabit is something we are always, to some extent, constructing. Homer builds the Lego Springfield because the real Springfield is changing in ways he cannot control. He builds it because construction is the one activity in which you can be certain of the outcome, in which the instructions are followed and the pieces fit together, and the finished product is exactly what the box promised. Real life does not work this way. Real life produces a daughter who is growing up, who is becoming someone different from the daughter Homer has been learning how to be a father to, who is discovering that she needs less from him than she needed before, which is the natural and desired outcome of good parenting, and also a kind of loss that no amount of preparation can make painless. The Lego world is Homer's answer to this loss. In the Lego world, Lisa is the age she was when Homer built this version of her. The relationship is the same shape it was when he built it. Nothing has been rearranged by the passage of time or the natural development of a child into something more complex and more autonomous. The episode is making an argument about nostalgia that is more sophisticated than most nostalgia arguments. It is not saying that nostalgia is bad. It is not saying that Homer is wrong to love the version of Lisa he has had. It is saying that holding on to that version, building a world in which that version cannot change, is a form of love that eventually becomes a form of harm. The Lego Lisa is not Lisa. She is Homer's idea of Lisa, and eventually Homer's idea of Lisa will diverge from Lisa herself enough that insisting on the idea means losing the person. Homer dismantles the Lego world because he understands this. The real Springfield reassembles around him, imperfect and changing and full of a Lisa who is growing up, and Homer chooses it. And the choice is both obvious and genuinely hard, and the episode knows it is both. This is the show, in its 25th season, being as precise and as honest about love and parenthood as it was in its golden age, using a different set of tools but arriving at the same truth. The tools changed. The truth did not. Season 30 contains the episode called My Way or The Highway to Heaven, which is a story about what happens when a person who has lived a life of strict moral principle encounters the machinery of the afterlife and discovers that the machinery is less organized than they had assumed. The episode uses the afterlife, which the show had visited briefly in the very first season's Bart Gets Hit by a Car, as a setting for a more extended examination of the relationship between faith and certainty, between what you believe about the universe and what the universe actually turns out to contain. The episode is strange because it allows the afterlife to be genuinely strange, not a parody of religious convention or a satirical take on specific theological positions, but an actual place with its own logic and its own inhabitants and its own relationship to the question of what a good life amounts to. The show has always been willing to take God seriously within the context of comedy, more willing than most American sitcoms. And in season 30, it is still doing that, still treating the metaphysical questions as real questions, even in the context of jokes. Season 31's episode called Warren Priests Part 2 continues the story of the progressive minister that Part 1 began, and it does something unexpected. It allows both the minister and the resistant congregation to be right about something. The minister's vision of a more engaged, more contemporary, more relevant faith community is genuinely good. The congregation's attachment to the specific forms and rhythms of their particular tradition is genuinely understandable. The episode does not resolve this conflict into a winner and a loser. It resolves it into a compromise that neither side finds entirely satisfying, which is the honest outcome. Season 32's The Road to Cincinnati is an episode that deserves to be discussed alongside the great Odd Couple road trip episodes in the show's history. The odd couple in this case is Homer and Superintendent Chalmers, and the road they travel is both literal and metaphorical, and what they discover about each other, removed from the context that usually defines their relationship, is surprising in the way that real discoveries about people you thought you knew are surprising. Chalmers, in this episode, is allowed to be something other than the exasperated authority figure whose primary function is to respond to Skinner's failures. He is a person with his own background and his own particular relationship to the work he has spent his career doing, and his own capacity for warmth that the exasperation of his standard Springfield context usually keeps suppressed. Homer, being Homer, catalyzes this warmth in the way that Homer sometimes catalyzes things he does not intend through the specific quality of his attention, which is when it is directed at another person, completely without agenda, completely without the social calculation that most people apply to conversations. Homer listens to Chalmers without thinking about what he is going to say next, without using Chalmers's words as material for his own response, simply receiving what Chalmers offers him, and the reception is itself a gift. This is one of the strangest and most consistent things the show has always said about Homer, that his obliviousness, the very quality that makes him catastrophically bad at his job and frequently thoughtless in his relationships, also gives him a quality of complete presence in conversation that more strategically intelligent people rarely achieve. Homer is too simple to be calculating. And the absence of calculation, in the specific context of two men in a car on a road trip, is sometimes exactly what is needed. Season 33's Mothers and Other Strangers, which we touched on earlier, has a moment that deserves extended attention. It is the moment where Marge finds a photograph of her mother at roughly her own current age and looks at the photograph and sees something in her mother's face that she recognizes from her own mirror. This is a moment that every person who has ever reached an age their parents inhabited before them will understand. The recognition is not just physical, though it is physical. It is the recognition of a life stage, a recognition that you have arrived at a place your parent occupied before you, that the distance between you has collapsed into something closer, that you can now see your parent not as a permanent authority, but as a person who was also your age once, and who had a face that looked like this face, and who was navigating the same territory you are now navigating. Marge's recognition is wordless. The show does not explain it or editorialize it. She looks at the photograph, and the photograph looks back, and the episode holds that moment long enough for the viewer to inhabit it, and then it moves on, because that is what you do with moments like this. You feel them, and then you continue. This is the show in its 33rd season being exactly as honest as it was in its first season, as honest as it was in Moaning Lisa and Homer's Odyssey and Lady Bouvier's Lover, as honest as it was about the most ordinary and universal and difficult experiences that its characters were available to have. The craft has changed. The confidence has changed. The formal vocabulary has expanded enormously. But the willingness to look directly at something true and hold it for a moment before moving on has not changed at all. That is what the show has always been at its best. Not the funniest thing on television, not the most ambitious, not the most formally sophisticated, but the most willing, the most consistently willing to look at something true and stay there for a moment, without apologizing, without undercutting it immediately with a joke, without retreating to the safety of irony. Just staying, just looking, just holding the moment long enough to feel what it actually is, and then moving on, because the show is always moving on, always cycling back to the couch and the opening credits and the next episode, always returning to the family on Evergreen Terrace who are still the same and always slightly different, who have never aged, and who have somehow, across 36 seasons and 800 episodes, become part of how a significant portion of the English-speaking world understands what it means to try to love your family well and fail and try again. That is the show. That is what we have been moving through tonight. Slowly, from the first season's lamplight to the modern era's still-burning questions, through every strange corner and every quiet truth, and every moment where the joke and the genuine feeling arrived at the same place from different directions, and discovered that they had always been the same thing. You are very close to sleep now, if you have not already arrived there. Let the images settle, the saxophone in the night air, the Lego bricks, taken apart one by one, the real Springfield emerging underneath them. Homer at 4 in the morning, exhausted and trying. Ned Flanders in Humbleton, discovering that cheerfulness without friction is not peace. Burns in his enormous house, alone in all of it. Marge looking at a photograph of her mother. Springfield is dark now. The plant is humming. The streets are empty. The stars above the cooling towers are doing what stars have always done in this town. Burning, patient, indifferent, and somehow, in the dream logic of this place, part of the story. Sleep now. We will be here when you come back. Springfield always is. There is something worth saying about the show's relationship to time that goes beyond the floating timeline theory and the coma theory and all the elaborate structures that fans have built to explain why nobody in Springfield ages. The real reason, the reason that precedes all the theories, is that the show was made by people who understood that the most painful thing about love is that the people you love change, and that the most powerful fantasy available to anyone who loves someone is the fantasy of holding them exactly as they are at the moment when the love is most perfectly formed. The Simpson children are frozen at 10 and 8 and 1 because those are the ages at which a parent's love for their child is at its most uncomplicated. Bart at 10 is still small enough to carry, still young enough to need his parents for the essential things, old enough to be interesting, not yet old enough to have the full autonomy that will eventually make him fully separate from them. Lisa at 8 is at the height of her dependence on the emotional validation that only parents can provide, young enough that her intelligence has not yet produced the isolation that it will produce when she is older, and more fully aware of how different she is from the people around her. Maggie at 1 is the purest expression of the need that parents exist to fill, a being who requires everything and who gives back the specific, uncomplicated love of an infant who has not yet learned to withhold anything. These ages are not arbitrary. They are the ages at which the emotional life of a parent is organized most completely around the children, at which the children are most completely in need of the parent, at which the relationship between them has its maximum symmetry, After this, the children will need less, and the parents will need more from the children, and the symmetry will be replaced by something more complicated, and ultimately more mature, but less perfectly organized around love. Springfield's residents are frozen at these ages because the show understands that this is the wish at the center of the family story, not the wish to avoid aging for yourself. The wish to keep the people you love young, to stay in the period of the relationship where the need and the love are most simply organized around each other, to never have to watch your child become a person who needs you less. This wish is what the coma theory calls the dream. It is what the radiation theory calls the mutation. It is what the Springfield's collective denial calls the chosen reality. All three explanations are correct in the same way. They are all true stories about why a father would want his children to stay young forever, and they differ only in the mechanism they propose for the wanting. The wanting itself is universal. Every parent who has watched a child grow up, who has seen the small, demanding creature become a larger, more autonomous, less physically present being, who has felt the specific loss of a developmental stage that was precious and that is now over, understands the wanting. The Simpsons just decided to make the wanting real, to build a world in which the wanting is so powerful that it defeats time, and then to inhabit that world for 36 years and see what it felt like from the inside. The episodes about Grandpa Abe Simpson that are scattered through the early and middle seasons of the show deserve their own slow consideration. Abe is a character who is easy to underestimate, whose comic function, the rambling old man whose stories go nowhere and whose past is a confused tangle of incompatible memories, can obscure the fact that he is also the show's most sustained meditation on what it means to grow old in a culture that has no use for you. Abe Simpson was young once. This is easy to forget because the show rarely depicts him young, because the character exists in the present tense of a man in his 80s or 90s who has outlived his own relevance. But the flashback episodes that occasionally show the young Abe, the man who fought in the Second World War and came home to a country that was building a future he expected to be part of, reveal something that the comic grandpa rarely makes visible, that this man had ambitions and desires, and a sense of his own importance that were no less real for having been disappointed. The episode called Raging Abe Simpson and His Grumbling Grandson in The Curse of the Flying Hellfish from Season 7 is the fullest treatment of young Abe that the show ever produced. It involves the Second World War, a stolen collection of artworks, a blood oath among soldiers, and Burns' attempt to claim what the oath was supposed to protect. The plot is adventure comedy, but what the episode contains beneath the adventure is a picture of who Abe was before he became what Homer's father sees when he looks at him, which is an old man in a rest home who tells stories nobody listens to. The young Abe is not just competent. He is vital, he is brave in a specific and grounded way that is different from cartoon heroism. He is a man among men in the wartime context that gave his generation its most defining shared experience. He was, briefly, significant in a way that the rest of his life did not replicate. What happened to the vitality? What happened between the war and the rest home? The show does not chart this decline in detail, leaves it as something the audience is supposed to understand has happened through the accumulated experience of watching old men in a culture that has no framework for their continued significance. But the gap between the young Abe of the flashback and the comic grandpa of the present tense is one of the most melancholy things the show has ever depicted, precisely because it depicts it without comment, as something that simply happened, as the ordinary outcome of surviving long enough. This is the strange heart of the Abe Simpson stories. Not the comedy of his confusion or the absurdism of his memories, but the gap, the enormous gap, between who he was and who he is, and the complete absence in the culture he inhabits of any mechanism for honoring the distance he has traveled. The Springfield that exists after midnight is different from the Springfield that exists during the day. This is not an observation the show makes explicitly, but it is an observation that certain episodes support if you pay attention to when they are set, to the quality of light that the animation uses in their nighttime sequences, to the specific feeling of the town when its residents are asleep and only a few figures are awake and moving through it. Homer at the Quickie Mart at 4 in the morning, buying Lisa's pony, is in a different Springfield from the one that exists during the day. Bart alone in the dark, carrying the statue's head, is in a different Springfield. Lisa playing saxophone on an empty street corner is in a different Springfield. These nighttime Springfields share a quality that the daytime version lacks, a quality of suspension, of the world being between states, of the rules being slightly less fixed than they are when everyone is awake and applying them. This is the Springfield that most closely resembles the Springfield of the theories. The nighttime Springfield where Homer might genuinely be in a hospital bed dreaming. The nighttime Springfield where the radiation is perhaps more visible in the dark, where the three-eyed fish might rise to the surface of the river and catch the moonlight. The nighttime Springfield where the accumulation of all the strange things the town contains becomes harder to ignore because the daytime distractions are absent. We are in the nighttime Springfield tonight. We have been here for the length of this video, moving through the dark streets of a town that does not age, through the strange episodes of every season, through the hidden rooms and the jazz music, and the Lego bricks and the statues without heads. This is where we belong, on a night like this. Not in the daytime Springfield of the opening credits and the school and the plant and the routine. In the nighttime Springfield where the familiar places look slightly different, where the shapes of things are soft and uncertain, where you can almost hear the saxophone somewhere in the distance, being played by someone small and 8 years old who has been 8 years old for 36 years and who will still be 8 years old when you wake up tomorrow. The music will still be there. Springfield will still be there. The family will still be on the couch, still watching television, still finding their way to each other through all the chaos and stupidity and love that the town contains. There is one more thing to say before we let the show go dark for the night. It is about what all of this, all 36 seasons and 800 episodes and every strange corner we have visited tonight, what it adds up to. It adds up to a sustained act of love for the idea of the American family. Not a specific American family, not an idealized one. Not one that has everything figured out or that makes consistently good decisions or that represents the best version of what family can be. An ordinary one. A loud, imperfect, cramped, financially anxious, emotionally inarticulate, endlessly trying ordinary one. The Simpsons has been on the air for 36 years, and across all that time, through every theory and every mystery and every strange episode and every continuity error and every failed prediction and every successful one, through everything that critics said was a sign of decline and everything that fans said was a sign of the show still being worth watching, through all of it, the thing the show has never wavered on is the ordinary, imperfect love of this ordinary, imperfect family. Homer loves Marge. He fails to express it correctly most of the time. He fails to prioritize it correctly most of the time. He is too simple and too oblivious and too organized around his own comfort to be the husband that a person as intelligent and patient and quietly strong as Marge deserves. But he loves her. The love is real, and it is total, and it is the one thing he has ever done that did not require intelligence or discipline or the removal of a crayon from his brain. He just loves her, and he has been doing it for 36 years. And the show has never once suggested that the love is not worth the imperfect expression it consistently receives. This is what we came to Springfield for. Not the theories, not the mysteries, not the strange episodes and the hidden rooms and the three-eyed fish. Those are the ways the show makes the love visible from the outside, the ways it gives the love a shape that can be analyzed and discussed and wondered about. The love itself is simpler. It is the family on the couch. It is the beer and the television, and the Sunday night at 8 p.m. It is Marge's hand finding Homer's in the dark, and Homer being exactly awake enough to notice. That is Springfield. That is the show. We have spent a long time in Springfield tonight. Long enough that the town has become familiar in a different way than it was when we started. Familiar not just from having watched it, but from having looked at it slowly, from having moved through it without the urgency of plot, without the engine of comedy driving us forward. Looking at Springfield this way, slowly and at night, you notice things that the forward momentum of watching the show usually prevents you from stopping at. You notice the quality of the light on the streets in the episodes set at dusk, that specific orange gold that the show uses to signal the end of the day. You notice the way the nuclear plant on the hill is almost always visible in exterior shots of Springfield, always there on the horizon, always glowing slightly, present in the peripheral vision of every outdoor scene, the way a very large and consequential thing tends to be present in the peripheral vision of the people who live nearby. You notice that the Simpson house at 525 Evergreen Terrace has a specific quality of lived-in imperfection that the show maintains consistently across 36 years. The house is not clean. It is not orderly. It is the house of a family that uses every room for its actual purpose and does not maintain performance-clean surfaces because nobody in the family has the energy or the inclination. It looks like home, which is a different thing from looking like a house. You notice that Springfield has a water tower, and a gorge, and a tire fire that has been burning since at least the early seasons, and a monorail that presumably still runs somewhere, and a harbor, and a mountain range visible in certain establishing shots, and a desert. And all of these things exist simultaneously in the same town because Springfield is not a map, it is a feeling. The feeling of a town that is yours, that you have lived in long enough to know its geography not as fact but as intimacy. You notice that the characters, all of them, even the background characters who appear for a single episode and never return, are drawn with a specificity that goes beyond what the plot requires. Springfield is full of people who have faces that contain something, that suggest inner lives that the plot will never visit, that exist in the background of scenes as evidence that the town is real, that life is happening everywhere in it simultaneously, that the story the camera is following is only one of thousands. This is the show's most underrated achievement, the sense it creates that Springfield is populated by people rather than by characters, that the story you are watching is not the only story happening, that Moe's Tavern contains regulars whose own stories you will never follow, that the Springfield Elementary cafeteria is full of children whose parents you will never meet, that the streets of Springfield, even in episodes that are focusing entirely on the Simpson family, are full of people going somewhere, doing something, living their lives in the peripheral vision of the camera. This is what makes Springfield feel like a place rather than a set. The density of peripheral life, the implication of story everywhere, most of it not being followed, most of it disappearing into the background without the show ever having to pay it off or explain it. The show trusts you to feel the density without the show having to justify it, and the trust is correct. The density is there. The town breathes. That breathing is what we have been resting inside tonight. The breath of a town that has been breathing for 36 years, that has exhaled 36 years of stories into the air, most of them funny, many of them strange, some of them genuinely moving, all of them organized around the same central truth. A family lives here. They love each other badly and well. The town around them is strange and broken and impossible, and theirs. And every Sunday night, or whenever you come to them, they are on the couch, right where you left them, ready to begin again. Close your eyes now if they are not already closed. Let the breathing of Springfield become the rhythm your own breathing follows. Slow, steady. The long, patient breath of a town that has been dreaming for decades and has no plans to stop. You are in Springfield now. You are home. We have moved through Springfield's strangest regular episodes tonight, season by season, but there is one more body of work worth acknowledging before we let the town go dark completely. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the show's annual Halloween anthology, the episodes that exist outside the main continuity, where the rules of Springfield are explicitly suspended and the show can go anywhere, do anything, kill anyone, and have it mean nothing by the following week's regular broadcast. These episodes are strange in an obvious way. They are intended to be strange. The strangeness is announced, scheduled, packaged, delivered in the mode of deliberate horror and deliberate surrealism. They are the show putting on its strange costume for one night a year and then taking it off again. But what they reveal, beyond their own intended strangeness, is something about what the show wishes it could do in the regular episodes. The Treehouse of Horror episodes go places that the regular continuity cannot. They kill Homer, repeatedly. They kill the children. They destroy Springfield entirely, sometimes several times in a single episode. They take the characters to extremes of violence and fear and moral dissolution that the regular show's investment in these characters as people, rather than as victims, prevents it from attempting. The regularity of this wish, the fact that the show has been making these Halloween episodes annually since season 2, suggests that the wish is ongoing. There is something in the show that wants to transgress its own limits, that finds the regular continuity's investment in consequence and character too constraining, that wants to see what happens if you remove the constraints entirely. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are safety valves. They let the pressure out once a year, and then the show returns to its regular mode, and the characters are intact again, and the constraints reassert themselves. And Springfield goes back to being the town where consequence is real and the characters matter, and you cannot simply kill everyone and start over. But the wish is always there, and once a year it gets its night. Sleep with that thought. The show's annual wish to be unconstrained, expressed, and then returned to its box. The characters alive again on the other side of Halloween, ready for another year of being people rather than victims. of carrying their stories forward rather than being the subjects of someone else's horror anthology. They are very resilient, the people of Springfield. They come back from everything, even from the treehouse of horror, even from death, even from the end of the episode. They are always on the couch again, at the beginning. That is the real mystery of Springfield. Not who shot Burns or whether Homer is dreaming. The real mystery is how they keep finding their way back to that couch, season after season, year after year, unchanged and still together. Maybe the answer is simpler than any theory. Maybe they keep finding their way back because the story keeps needing them there. And stories, as long as someone is telling them, do not end. Not in Springfield. Not tonight. The show's treatment of Marge across 36 seasons is itself one of its strangest achievements. Marge is, in the structure of the show, the most static character. Homer changes within episodes, Bart has character arcs that span seasons, Lisa develops with a consistency that is legible across the show's run. But Marge is, episode to episode and season to season, most reliably herself. Patient, present, the center of everything, doing the invisible work that allows everyone else to have the life they have. This consistency could be a failure of imagination. It could be the show defaulting to a particular idea of what a wife and mother is and refusing to develop it. Critics have made this argument, and the argument has merit in certain respects. There are seasons where Marge's role in the household feels more like a function than a character, where she exists to notice Homer's disasters and manage the children's crises and hold everything together without the show attending very carefully to what it costs her. But there is another way to understand Marge's consistency, a way that is stranger and more interesting, and that the show occasionally makes visible in its more carefully considered episodes. Marge is consistent because she has decided to be consistent. Her steadiness is a choice, not a condition. She is not patient by nature, or not only by nature. She is patient because she has looked at her life and decided that patience is the right response to it, that the love she has for her family is worth the constant practice of patience that the family requires. This is the strangest thing the show has ever done with Marge. In an era when patient, domestic women in television are often depicted as either secretly suffering martyrs or as naive people who do not understand their own oppression, The Simpsons consistently depicts Marge as someone who knows exactly what she is doing and has chosen it with open eyes. She is not being patient because she does not know any better. She is being patient because she loves her family, and she understands that loving them well requires it, and she has the kind of strength that makes patience possible, not as self-negation but as self-expression. The episodes that reveal this most clearly are the ones where Marge almost leaves. Not the episodes where she threatens to leave dramatically and then returns as a comedy beat. The episodes where the almost leaving is real, where you can feel the alternative pressing against the edges of the life she has chosen, where the question of whether she would stay if she had the choice again is genuinely open. In those episodes, Marge always chooses to stay, but the show is careful to make clear that she is choosing. The choice is renewed, the patience is actively practiced, the love is not simply a given. It is a decision she makes, apparently every day, to be in this life rather than some other one. That decision, made and remade across 36 seasons, is the most extraordinary thing any character in Springfield does. Not Homer's impossible survival, not Burns's artificial immortality, not Maggie's brilliant silence, Marge's daily, ordinary, chosen love for a family that would be lost without it. Sleep with that. The ordinary, extraordinary choice. The patience as strength rather than submission. The most consistent character in Springfield being, in her consistency, the most radical one. We came here tonight for the strangeness. We stayed for the truth underneath it. That has always been the deal in Springfield. The strange is just the door. The truth is the room. And the room, when you find it, is always warmer than you expected. Warmer and quieter and more like home than anything that strange should have any right to be. Rest now. The room is here. You are in it. You have been in it all along. Good night.